In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Well, thank you so much to all the previous presenters. That was a really wonderful session. And I want to thank everyone here for allowing me to be your host today. I have reached the end of my session, and I'd like to now introduce Aaron Whitnell, one of the youngest rising young voices in conservation. He's a TV personality. He helps to run the Hertfordshire Zoo. And some of you may know him from the BBC's One Zoo 3. So greetings, Aaron. Karibu. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to be involved in this. And thank you so much for your wonderful hosting job that you've done so far, Paula. Hopefully I can continue that moving forward. I'm really, really looking forward to what we have coming up. It's obviously such an incredible event that we have, the Reverse the Red World Species Congress, and it's wonderful that the entire world of conservation is coming together for such an important program. Now, don't forget, as the event's going on, you will see QR codes coming up, so please make sure that using your phones that you do scan those QR codes to get more information. And on top of that, any of the talks that you hear, please be sure to put any questions that you have into the chat, because the presenters will be staying on in order to answer any questions that you may have afterwards. But coming up, we have some really, really exciting talks. Starting off with a fascinating presentation about bridging gaps and prioritizing species in conservation. But before we hear from Bello, we're honored that the next two presenters are going to be showing us the importance of species conservation efforts from all different levels, including national governments. We'll be joined by Paula Francisco Calajo, the Secretary of State for Climate Action and Sustainable Development in Angola. But first, we are heading to the German National Satellite event to hear from Sabine Riewenherm, the President of the Federal Agency for Conservation of Nature.
Sehr geehrte Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer des World Species Congress, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Naturschutzengagierte in der ganzen Welt. Es ist mir eine große Freude, Sie im Rahmen des World Species Congress als Präsidentin des Bundesamtes für Naturschutz und Mitglied der IUCN begrüßen zu dürfen. Ich bin mir sicher, dass wir in diesem Rahmen unser gemeinsames Anliegen voranbringen können, die Aktivitäten weltweit zum Schutz der Biodiversität international noch stärker zu vernetzen und voneinander zu lernen. Das Bundesamt für Naturschutz ist in Deutschland die zentrale Behörde für den Arten- und Naturschutz im Geschäftsbereich des Bundesumweltministeriums. Wir fördern und begleiten zahlreiche Projekte und Programme und vollziehen gesetzliche Vorgaben zum Schutz der Natur, wie zum Beispiel im CITES-Bereich oder auch im Meeresnaturschutz. Das Bundesamt für Naturschutz ist unter anderem auch Herausgeber der roten Listen. Diese haben in Deutschland schon seit sehr vielen Jahren eine bedeutende Rolle als Grundlage, um den Gefährdungsgrad von Arten beurteilen zu können und ob zum Beispiel Artenschutzmaßnahmen wirken oder auch eben nicht wirken. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, dieser World Species Kongress ist für den internationalen Naturschutz von großer Bedeutung. Er bietet ein wichtiges Forum, um den internationalen Austausch und Kooperation zu stärken und voneinander zu lernen. So ein Austausch ist wichtig, weil die Biodiversitätskrise weltweit stattfindet und alle Lebensräume und Artengruppen betrifft. Das Artensterben gefährdet, genauso wie der Verlust von Ökosystemen, nicht zuletzt auch unsere eigenen Lebensgrundlagen. Wir brauchen breite Bündnisse, wie heute hier beim World Species Kongress, um diese Biodiversitätskrise auf globaler Ebene zu lösen. Wir müssen unterschiedliche Perspektiven aus den Ländern, aber auch aus anderen Disziplinen über die Naturwissenschaft hinaus einbeziehen und voneinander lernen. Wie engagiert sich Deutschland für den Erhalt der Artenvielfalt? Deutschland hat die UN-Biodiversitätskonvention 1992 in Rio unterzeichnet. Damit hat sich Deutschland verpflichtet, eigene nationale Aktivitäten zum Schutz der biologischen Vielfalt zu unternehmen. In diesem Zuge hat die Bundesregierung 2007 die nationale Strategie zur biologischen Vielfalt verabschiedet. Bei den Verhandlungen des Übereinkommens über die biologische Vielfalt Ende 2022 in Montreal hat sich die deutsche Delegation für ehrgeizige Ziele eingesetzt. In Montreal haben wir zusammen mit vielen anderen Ländern und engagierten Menschen, von denen wahrscheinlich hier auch einige dabei sind, viel erreicht. Unter anderem, dass sich die Vertragsstaaten verpflichten, bis 2030 30% der degradierten Ökosysteme wiederherzustellen. 1/3 der Land- und Wasserflächen müssen unter Schutz gestellt und invasive Arten wirksam bekämpft werden, die bekanntermaßen inzwischen ein großer Faktor im Artensterben sind. Bis 2030, das sind nur noch 6 Jahre, die Zeit ist knapp für die Umsetzung der in Montreal beschlossenen ambitionierten Ziele. Auch in Deutschland müssen diese Ziele nun im nationalen Recht verankert werden. Das Umweltministerium ist gerade dabei, die nationale Biodiversitätsstrategie daraufhin neu aufzulegen. Die Neuauflage sieht vor allem einen Mechanismus vor, um die Ambitionen künftig weiter zu steigern und ein konsequentes Monitoring. Wie aber kommen wir in Deutschland von der Biodiversitätsstrategie in die Fläche? Ein vielseitiges Instrument, das wir in Deutschland dafür einsetzen, ist das Bundesprogramm Biologische Vielfalt. Seit 2011 fördern wir hier viele Projekte, für die auch Deutschland unter anderem Verantwortung trägt und die repräsentativ sind für den Artenschutz. Ein Beispiel möchte ich nennen, weil wir ja auch positive Beispiele hier international diskutieren wollen. Dank des Bundesprogramms kann zum Beispiel eine Wanze mit dem schönen Namen, jetzt wird es kompliziert, Essigrosen-Dickfühler-Weichwanze, Excentricus platicornis, besser erforscht und effektiv geschützt werden. Ihr einzig bekannter Lebensraum in Mitteleuropa liegt in Deutschland. Ganz besonders freue ich mich aber auch, dass wir das Aktionsprogramm Natürlicher Klimaschutz haben. Für dieses neue Programm stellt die Bundesregierung bis 2026 rund 4 Milliarden Euro zur Verfügung. Es zielt darauf ab, die klimaschützenden Eigenschaften gesunder natürlicher Ökosysteme zu fördern. Denn diese Ökosysteme binden CO2, Moore zum Beispiel, und bieten gleichzeitig Lebensraum für viele gefährdete und geschützte Tiere und Pflanzen. Natürlicher Klimaschutz verbindet somit den Schutz von Klima und Natur. Er wirkt so der Doppelkrise aus Erderhitzung und Artensterben entgegen. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, wichtig für eine nationale und eine internationale Biodiversitätsstrategie ist natürlich auch ein guter und intensiver Kommunikations- und Dialogprozess. Kommunikation, wie sie heute hier bei diesem World Species Kongress eben auch stattfindet. Der Naturschutz braucht gesellschaftliche Unterstützung, braucht gesellschaftliche Akzeptanz, braucht Verbündete und Kooperation weltweit und braucht engagierte Menschen. Nur so können wir den Verlust von Arten, Lebensräumen und genetischer und innerartlicher Vielfalt, also den Verlust von Biodiversität, stoppen und eine Trendumkehr erreichen. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich bedanke mich herzlich bei der IUCN und der Reverse Red Initiative für die Ausrichtung des World Congress, Species Kongress. Ich bin mir sicher, dass dieser Kongress einen wichtigen Beitrag weltweit zum Erhalt bedrohter Arten leistet. Ich wünsche Ihnen noch einen spannenden weiteren Austausch und gute und intensive Diskussion. Herzliche Grüße aus dem Kölner Zoo und vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you for allowing us to be part of this panel, where we would like to address the importance of this Congress, but also mention that we will not need only to stop by on the main and known species that are going critical. We need to look at value chain, and we also need to look at what the IPBS and IRP tell us on their panels of discussions.
Thank you. Hello, how are you, sir?
And what science tell us.
You can
the taxonomic group of species, they need to be reviewed due to evaluation of the world, the impacts that we are all facing, and also the adaptation that wildlife, the animals, are having. This is why there is a huge need to also strengthen investigation and also apply more financial onto those investigations so that we know what is the evolution. If you look at the Holocene period and today, we should consider and maybe elevate the debate that climate, environment, biodiversity, desertification, or I even say Rio conventions, we need to review and to see where are we failing and what is the next step. So it's not only about our own survival, but it's the survival of the planet, where good practices concerning to the ESGs are also entailed by including climate and also private sector on their responsibilities. Communities do play a role. It's not about what do they do, but what are they preserving. We also look and need to address Nagoya Protocol, and that is where the basis lies for communities itself. So we thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to share our views in a particular way. We submit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bello Adamu, and I'm delighted to present on the topic, Bridging Gaps and Prioritizing Species Survival from the Center for Species Survival in Nigeria. I would like to start by extending our gratitude to the Reverse the Red and World Species Congress team for this opportunity to present on this very crucial event for species survival. All right, the Center for Species Survival in Nigeria was launched recently in 2023, and it represents a strategic partnership between the AP Leventis Ornithological Research Institute and the Species Survival Commission of the IUCN. It has a twofold mission of enhancing capacity building in the West Africa region and supporting the species conservation cycle through research, trainings, red list assessments, conservation planning and action. CSS Nigeria is Africa's first center for species survival, and it is located in Nigeria, in the middle belt of Nigeria. Next slide. Within the Amorum Forest Reserve. Amorum Forest Reserve is one of Nigeria's key biodiversity area, located at Jos East, Plateau State. So APLORI has been protecting this reserve for over 20 years now, and its success is evident in the increased vegetation health over the years. The reserve has unique regional endemic birds such as the rock firefinch, Jos Plateau indigo bird, along with threatened plants. These species have greatly benefited from the in situ conservation efforts in the reserve. APLORI has been advancing capacity building in West Africa by addressing critical knowledge gaps through training in master's degree and through training in master's degree. It has trained over 160 conservation biologists in Nigeria. And our work here as a Center for Species Survival is data-driven, and it leverages on expert-derived information and citizen science data like the Nigerian Bird Atlas project to inform conservation decisions. The launch of the NIBAB marked significant milestone in APLORI's impact in Nigeria as it connected people with nature. The project is ever progressing and has inspired other country-level projects such as Senegal Bird Atlas, Ghana Bird Atlas, Sierra Leone Bird Atlas. So you've seen a time lapse of the data coverage of the Nigerian Bird Atlas project, which is a massive effort, and all thanks to volunteers. All right, through the project, we have documented significant findings. We've documented the first country record of gray wagtail here in Nigeria. We have been able to know the state of threatened species, such as the Egyptian vulture, which we recorded only 2 records of the species over the past 8 years. Likewise, the black crown crane, which is Nigeria's national bird, we've recorded the black crown crane only twice, which shows the great peril these species are into. We've also been able to document noteworthy records such as the records of Arabian bustard, which has not been cited in Nigeria for almost 20 years, golden Niger steppe eagle. We've recorded range extension in species such as the house sparrow, black gray-backed fiscal, amongst others. All right, so birds are a window to nature. Through this project, a number of citizen science initiatives have been inspired, such as the Nigerian butterfly monitoring, along with people submitting their records to iNaturalist, amongst others. So you can read more from some of our publications in the next slide. And yeah, so building on decades of APLORI's impact and data generation efforts, the Center for Species Survival Nigeria is utilizing IUCN tools and processes throughout the species conservation cycle, assess, plan, and act to prioritize species survival through national red list, through green list of species to assess red list and recovery status of priority species, devise conservation plans, and take appropriate actions. So far, based on our assessments on threatened species in Nigeria on the IUCN Red List, which is the global authority on biodiversity status, there are over 503 species that are threatened with extinction, and plant are the most threatened. There are 67 critically endangered species, with fishes most threatened, followed by dicot flowering plants, amongst others. There are 164 vulnerable species, endangered species, 162, I mean. So this shows the urgent need for conservation measures across various taxonomic groups in Nigeria to achieve the target 4 of the global biodiversity framework. And protecting this diverse group of species is crucial not only for their survival, but for maintaining balanced ecosystem. And to do this, collaborative action is essential, involving policymakers, species specialists from the Nigerian Species Specialist Group, policymakers, local communities, amongst others. In a nutshell, when it comes to making informed conservation decisions, data is everything. When stakeholders such as government agencies, policymakers, conservationists, individuals, local communities are aware of the challenges and opportunities for conservation, they are more likely to actively participate and take appropriate measures to reverse the negative trend. All right. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sabine, Paula, and Bello, for those fantastic talks. And for those of you who just joined us, welcome to the Reverse the Red Wild Species Congress. For those of you who have been tuning in for hours now, I really hope you guys are enjoying all of the fascinating talks that are coming to you from across the world. Just to very quickly reintroduce myself, my name's Aaron Whitnell, and I'm part of the family that run Hertfordshire Zoo and the Big Cat Sanctuary in the UK. And I'm also a host on the TV shows One Zoo 3 and OZT Goes Wild in Britain. Now, coming up, we have some amazing talks on the conservation impact in Guinea and also dung beetle conservation success. But right now, there are people all over the world tuning in. We have more than 90 satellite events taking place all around the world, like the watch party that's currently happening in Toyohashi Zoo in Japan. So thank you very much to everyone who's tuning in from there. And thanks to the Kazu from the zoo for joining us earlier to present on the work to recover the Yamato salamander. We also have a watch party taking place here at Hertfordshire Zoo as well. So yeah, it's wonderful to see so many people from so many different backgrounds, whether it's zoos, NGOs, governments, and obviously conservation organizations and projects from all over the world coming together to really play an important part in this World Species Congress. So now it's time to move on to our next event. And as I said, the two that we have coming up, firstly, we have conservation impact in Guinea. And then following on from that, we have a talk on dung beetle conservation success.
Alors, la République de Guinée est un pays côtier de la zone ouest africaine et qui regorge de très grandes potentialités en termes de ressources de biodiversité et qui fait déjà un enjeu qui intéresse tout adepte ou personnes intéressées par l'enjeu développement durable, puisque non seulement c'est un pays riche en ressources naturelles, mais aussi c'est un pays riche en ressources minéralières. Donc, comment concilier ces deux enjeux et faire en sorte que nous accueillons un développement respectueux des normes et des équilibres fragiles de l'environnement, c'est ce qui fait un peu sa particularité. Et
j'aime les animaux et la nature en fonction de leur fonction. Parce que le monde ne peut pas se développer sans être vivant, animal et végétal. Il y a une corrélation entre les animaux et les hommes et la nature. Donc il faut chercher à les protéger pour ne pas qu'on perde ces enfants-là. Le projet de conservation de lamantin est unique en son genre à partir du monde des enjeux. Parce que le lamantin vit comme habitat essentiel la mangrove. Et cette mangrove est essentielle et cette mangrove est menacée. Des actions anthropiques, c'est des actions de l'homme. Et c'est le cas même de Benti, où la coupe de bois de mangrove est vraiment d'actualité. Et pour leur survie, les hommes sont obligés de couper le bois pour faire soit du pain, pour faire du bois et énergie pour les familles. Et la Guinée est un des rares pays où le gaz butane n'est pas subventionné. 90% de la population vit des bois de mangrove. Donc vraiment, c'est une destruction totale. Et si on n'y prend pas garde.
Le projet de conservation de tortues marines est unique parce que c'est un projet qui œuvre pour la protection d'une espèce qui souffre de beaucoup de menaces et aussi parce que nous associons la communauté locale à la protection. Dans notre équipe, nous avons 7 jeunes éco-gardes qui sont tous natifs des îles Tristão. À part moi, le point focal et la stagiaire, il n'y a pas d'autres femmes dans l'équipe parce que nous n'avons pas eu d'opportunité d'engager de femmes éco-gardes. Et nos éco-gardes ont pour mission de surveiller la plage en faisant les patrouilles tous les jours, en surveillant les nids et en même temps aussi nous leur donnons les formations sur la transplantation des nids et aussi l'identification des différentes espèces de tortues marines.
Oui, on intervient dans le cadre de ce projet, de ce fabuleux projet de conservation depuis déjà 1 an et demi pour non seulement documenter la distribution, l'abondance, mais aussi la géographie, la présence de ces espèces-là dans nos zones les zones du littoral guinéen. Donc, grâce bien sûr à l'appui au financement de Mubadala Foundation et la Fondation Mohamed bin Zayed pour la conservation des espèces.
Did you know that around 6,000 species of dung beetles prevent our grasslands, savannas, tropical forests, and of course pasture lands around the world from becoming huge piles of dung? My name is Camila Leandro, and I'm the co-chair of IUCN's Dung Beetle Specialist Group. And today I'm here to deliver some actions that could help to preserve dung beetles worldwide. Just last week, I was with a master's student from Hokkaido University in Japan, and she was telling me that from her experiments, ranchers who favor extensive grazing over intensive grazing and that avoid pesticide use, such as ivermectin, among other veterinary molecules, hosted more dung beetles in terms of abundance and species richness, and therefore beneficiated for their ecosystem services. This is just an example of management types that not only favor species in the long term, which is a win-win situation for grazing systems. But as many other insects, dung beetles are threatened by habitat destruction, like in the tropics, chemical pollution, and land use change, such as overgrazing, intensive agricultural practices, or even traditional herding abandonment. How to instigate behavior change, then, you might ask? Well, Claudia Medina's initiative in Colombia is a good example on how scientists can reach ranchers, can also enhance their naturalistic skills and partnership for species conservation and socio-economical development, which benefits both humans and dung beetles in pasture lands. William's Perrin project in southwestern France is another good example in which farmers, conservation stakeholders, veterinarians, and the agricultural world were invited to create a network in which they all work together and learn from each other in order to maintain healthy ecosystems in which dung beetles, herds, and humans can thrive. Dialogue, co-construction, and coming back to traditional management types with the awareness that veterinary products not only harm pests, but also all sorts of arthropods is needed. But also, we need people to voice at larger scales, like governments, that in order to avoid to be submerged by dung piles all around the world, chemical use, intensive agricultural practices, and habitat destruction must be strongly regulated by law. So now that you know, spread the word. Save dung beetles and save yourselves from a stinky world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille, for such a fantastic talk about dung beetles. And I really hope everyone is learning things that they may not have even known anything about prior to this. And it's just fascinating to, like I said, hear from so many people from all over the world. Don't forget, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat because presenters can come back to you and answer any questions that you may have. Now, we're going to turn it over to Raymond Perez de Ayala, sorry if I messed that up, for WWF Spain, who's going to talk to us about downlisting the Iberian lynx, which is such an incredible achievement. And David Cooper, Acting Executive Secretary for the Convention on Biological Diversity, with a message ahead of the International Day of Biological Diversity.
Para mí salvar al lince es casi un reto vital. Es toda mi vida laboral y espero que siga hasta que me jubile. Cuando empezamos a trabajar no sabíamos ni cuántos linces había. El primer gran reto fue saber cómo contarlos directamente. Nos encontramos con que solo había 100 linces en 2 poblaciones. Habíamos pasado encima de una estima de 1.200, 600 animales a solamente 100. Fue una hecatombe europea que prácticamente se nos estaba yendo de las manos la especie. El primer paso en la recuperación fue fijar esas 2 poblaciones que nos quedaban, que era Andújar y Doñana. El siguiente paso ya empezaron a criarlos en cautividad y la siguiente fue hacer pruebas de cómo reintroducirlos en campo. Se hicieron 2 poblaciones nuevas en Andalucía y cuando ya aprendimos, el proyecto anterior fue reintroducirlo en toda su área histórica y creamos 4 poblaciones nuevas. El lince no estaba donde le gustaría estar, sino que está donde le hemos dejado estar. No son sus zonas óptimas. Ahora mismo ya lo estamos llevando a las zonas donde realmente las condiciones son buenas. Ahora mismo el gran reto que tenemos es conectar las 2 grandes poblaciones históricas, Montes de Toledo, que es una población reintroducida recientemente, con Sierra Morena, que es la población histórica que quedaba. Y justo tenemos el valle en medio, que lo que tenemos que conseguir es que lo puedan saltar los linces. Pues el gran problema que tenemos para conectar las poblaciones es que entre las zonas de montes tenemos zonas que son un desierto para muchas especies. Es muy complicado recuperar ese hábitat. Cuando comencé no sabíamos cuántos había y muchos años después, casi 20 años después, estuve en la primera suelta de un lince en Montes de Toledo con un dueño que llevaba años trabajando con nosotros y la verdad es que fue muy emocionante. Estábamos ahí los dos que se nos saltaban las lágrimas. Montes de Toledo la verdad es que ha sido un éxito. Ya es la población con más cachorros de todas las que tenemos. Ha superado a la histórica población más grande de Andújar y probablemente el año que viene ya sea la población más grande de todas las existentes. Es un caso de éxito mundial, es de las pocas especies que se ha recuperado gracias a los esfuerzos de conservación. Cada avistamiento la verdad es que es bastante emocionante, sobre todo si consigues verlos cazar o hacer algo de manera natural. La verdad es que se te ponen los pelos de punta. Yo he tenido la suerte de verlos a esta distancia, casi a 2 metros. Son los reyes de la jungla mediterránea y muchos de ellos no se asustan. Y si tienes la suerte de toparte con ellos, los puedes ver cazar. Casi ves los ojos y la mirada penetrante cuando están mirando a la presa. Es muy emocionante. Hace 2 años hicimos unas jornadas para ver cuándo podríamos decir que hemos salvado el lince. Ahora mismo estamos a mitad de camino. Hemos avanzado muchísimo, pero tenemos que llegar por lo menos a los 3.000. Estamos exactamente a mitad de camino. Ahora mismo ya podemos decir que lo hemos alejado del peligro crítico de extinción. Personalmente siento orgullo y mucha satisfacción.
The 22nd of May is the International Day for Biological Diversity, IDB. This is a global observance proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly to raise awareness of the importance and value of biodiversity. IDB 2024 will be dedicated to the promotion of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, also known as the Biodiversity Plan. This is humanity's master plan to halt and reverse the loss of biological diversity around the world. Are you planning to organize an event to mark IDB 2024? This year, the theme is Be Part of the Plan. You can download the logo and find other resources at www.cbd.int/IDB. Let us highlight your event by sending information through the IDB 2024 webpage. Wherever you are, you can be part of the plan, the Biodiversity Plan.
Good day to you all. I'd like to thank the Reverse the Red founding partners, the IUCN Species Survival Commission, and the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums for organizing this, the first World Species Congress. This 24-hour program is designed to bring together a wide range of ideas to address the crisis of species loss through a science-based, interdisciplinary, and inclusive event. The IUCN Red List has assessed over 157,000 species, from among which more than 44,000 species are threatened with extinction, including 41% of amphibians, 37% of sharks and rays, 36% of reef-building corals, 34% of conifers, 27% of mammals, and 13% of birds. And over the past 50 years, the populations of wild animal species have declined on average by around 2/3. That is incredibly significant. This decline is driven by deforestation and other land use change, overfishing and unsustainable hunting, pollution, disease, climate change, and invasive alien species. Without urgent action to address these drivers, around 1 million species face a high risk of extinction, as reported by IPBES in its global assessment. In December 2022, the global community agreed to act for species and for nature by adopting the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the Biodiversity Plan. The level and scope of ambition within the Biodiversity Plan is unprecedented. The plan's 4 goals, to protect and restore nature, to prosper with nature, to share benefits fairly, and to invest and collaborate for nature, are supported by 23 ambitious targets. We must now translate these ambitions into actions at all levels. Urgent implementation of the Biodiversity Plan is critical if we are to see results by 2030. Specifically, Target 4 of the plan aims to halt species extinction, protect genetic diversity, and manage human-wildlife conflicts. Other targets address each of the drivers of biodiversity loss, as well as the underlying causes. Our ability to work together and join efforts is key to reversing biodiversity loss and achieving the goals and targets of the Biodiversity Plan. Countries are currently working to update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans in alignment with the Biodiversity Plan by COP16 in Cali, Colombia, later this year. It is critical to set or revise national targets with the level of ambition matching those of the global goals and targets so that national ambition will accelerate global ambition. And once NBSAPs are updated, they need to be adopted as policy or legal instruments and integrated into broader strategies and plans to ensure mainstreaming. As this process unfolds, Reverse the Red will launch an NBSAP medal, which will be given out at the World Conservation Congress in 2025 to honor and recognize plans from each region. And while countries work to implement the Biodiversity Plan, we know that IUCN and its commissions, expert groups and secretariat, along with other partners, and the CBD Secretariat will be ready to provide support and help in monitoring progress. All countries will also need to mobilize financial resources domestically and through increased international flows. And we need to ensure the effective participation of all, including indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth, as well as business and governments at all levels. We will only achieve the goals and targets of the Biodiversity Plan if we all work together. I invite you all to be part of the plan, the Biodiversity Plan. Thank you so much, and I wish you a productive and successful event.
Thank you so much to Raymond and, of course, David Cooper for such an important message. And, of course, to the Convention on Biological Diversity for their support for this first ever Reverse the Red World Species Congress. And don't forget, anytime you see that QR code pop up, please be sure to scan that so that we can gather more information. And of course, be sure to send in any questions that you have to any of the presenters or panelists that are speaking today. If you're just joining us, then welcome. If you've been tuning in for hours, then by all means, I really hope you're taking a lot from this World Species Congress. And don't forget, we are basically surrounded by participants in over 190 countries, thousands of people from all around the world coming together for such an incredible cause. So don't forget, you can search for each other conservationists within your country. You can search for taxa or sector, and you can even make new connections. Be sure to use this Congress as an opportunity to do that, because by doing that, we are going to be able to become the green beacon that the world needs, so that we can then spread our messages to the general public and obviously hope to make the wider differences that we want to. Now, you can also send a postcard showing where you work and also what species you work with on the share page, so be sure to do that. And up next is one of our most exciting and innovation panels. This one is focused on financing biodiversity. It's a topic that is so important and crucial for all of us in our conservation efforts. So they're going to be talking about the innovations on financing and the changes that we all need to be aware of and more. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Lahiru Wijedasa from BirdLife International's Asia Forest and coordinator to moderate this panel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel. I'm really lucky to be here today with three amazing panelists. Let me just introduce the people here, and I'll just tell you a bit about myself after that. First, we have Jan Yoshioka, who serves as the Vice President in Sustainable Finance for Conservation International. She leads a diverse range of public, private, blended financing strategies that support nature-positive outcomes across Asia and the Pacific. Second, we have Kevin Tan, who is the founder of Tri-Sector Associates, a nonprofit supported by the Singapore Economic Development Board and Temasek Trust that help to structure innovative funding models across social, healthcare, and environmental issues. His team has helped to pioneer some of the first outcomes-based funding and blended finance models in East and Southeast Asia. And finally, to round it off, we have Tom Quigley, who is the founder of Superorganism, a venture capital firm for tech startups that benefit biodiversity. He's also a coral reef conservationist turned startup operator and investor. Tom has worked at the intersection of technology and nature for his entire career. A bit about myself, I'm the Asia Forest Coordinator for BirdLife, and in that role, I actually work on hands-on conservation on the ground, trying to secure finance for projects and run projects saving forests across Southeast Asia and South Asia. So just a bit of the background to set the stage of this panel itself. We do know that tropical deforestation is a huge problem, and the estimates are that we need about $230 billion a year to address the problem currently. We only have $2.3 billion of funding today, and most of it coming from philanthropy and governments. By 2050, this should increase to up to $3 trillion. And this huge gap that we have is a problem, because we know what to do on the conservation front. And today in the conference, you've heard a lot of people talking about biodiversity. We have an idea, we know what to do, but where does the money come from? And that's the purpose of this panel that we have today. So let's start off with Jan, and we have a question for Jan, which is, in your opinion, what is our best national and global strategy to increase investments into biodiversity and species conservation efforts? Perhaps there might be some insights from carbon and biodiversity credits or any other kind of solutions that are out there. Could you give us like a broad overview?
Yeah, thanks, Lahiru, and thanks to the organizers for hosting this session. I think it's important context setting, because a lot of the dialogue around how we finance biodiversity conservation, how we finance things like nature-based solutions, have really centered on the need for private sector engagement. And I think that private sector finance is certainly a big part of the solution set. And some of our panelists will talk about ways and strategies that our different institutions are working to bring in those private finance flows to supplement public and philanthropic dollars. But I think just as an opener, it's important to recognize that public financing does and will continue to play a pretty significant role in financing nature conservation, financing biodiversity, both now and into the future. I think some of the statistics are that public financing makes up about 80% of the current flows to biodiversity globally, a large proportion of that coming from domestic governments. So really thinking about the ways in which from a national or subnational scale, governments can actually help to facilitate both publicly funded biodiversity solutions, as well as incentivize the private sector, are going to play a big role. If I were to say what the biggest opportunity is, it really is, I think there's a lot of consensus around the fact that we need to reform harmful subsidies, and that can take the form of sort of sunsetting those that we know, have really adverse climate and biodiversity impacts, or restructuring them into incentives that really channel different forms of investment and different types of development that are more biodiversity positive. I do think that, my last point here is really thinking about the tools and mechanisms beyond sort of general, climate or biodiversity regulations, and thinking about ways which we can work with governments as NGOs or as the private sector to design incentive schemes that really help to facilitate this. Maybe I'll, turn it over to the other panelists, but, one example that comes to mind actually is in Peru. I think they've had a really innovative approach to engaging the private sector in public works, which has now expanded into things like green infrastructure through their Works for Taxes scheme. So companies can actually offset a portion of their corporate income tax payments or liabilities and invest in nature-based solutions or green infrastructure. And I think tools like that are quite compelling and part of the solution set.
Thanks, Jen. I think that you use a segue to actually Tom right now, that we have seen governments kind of changing. Like you said, there are some innovative mechanisms. Tom, because you've worked throughout the whole spectrum from being a hands-on conservationist to now venture capital and to technology solutions, how do you see that kind of transition that we're seeing? Because we are in an exciting time, and we are at the verge of getting the finance that we need to be there, but how do we get there? And how is what you're doing kind of changing that?
Thanks, Lahiru. Yeah, there's been a real focus on that gap and how we close that gap in the next few decades to be able to bring the types of financing flows to nature that we need to see to be able to stem biodiversity loss. That's a lot of money to need to cover. And what we've seen from conservation organizations historically really has been a reliance on grant funding and research-based funding and philanthropy. There in recent years has also been an effort on new innovative types of financing, things like prizes and challenges to be able to really drive new innovation and support new innovation, pushing that money towards areas that may have not be obvious initially, and really support innovation through those types. But many of them are underpinned by philanthropy at the back end as well, even if they have an emphasis on market rate style solutions or solutions that can generate sustainable financing. And what we're starting to see is an emphasis not just on having that money come from philanthropic sources, but really be returns focused or market rate returns. And what that allows is it allows us to tap into a totally different pool of money from funders, where previously you may have a philanthropic bucket of funding as part of your larger portfolio of assets that you're able to start to deploy. But if you're starting to look at more market rate solutions, then you're able to move from just that slice of your philanthropic, which could just be a small slice of the larger pie, and start to say, okay, how can I take some of my other investment assets and put it towards things that align across nature and across my personal beliefs, either as an individual or retail investor, all the way up to larger foundations or high net worths. And so being able to tap into those different asset classes, and then on the other side, being able to provide different vehicles or solution opportunities that will allow for opening up those larger buckets of financing flows, are really the consideration of the moment, and how we're going to I think, be able to crack that gap of the 2 billion towards where we need to be able to sustain nature.
Thanks, Tom. I think that gives a nice sideway move to Kevin in this case, because I know, Kevin, you've worked with governments and philanthropy as a whole. The role of government and philanthropy, but the other side of it is, as we start seeing funding coming from different sources, like when you have governments and philanthropy coming in, it goes for a specific purpose of biodiversity, whereas funding coming from investment, private sector finance, comes with also the need for a return. And that might have a view on how we actually get the biodiversity and the community outcomes that we want. Do you have any thoughts on that and the role of government in that, and also as a moderation mechanism? Because we're looking at it now as a philanthropy and governments as catalytic funding. But then once you catalytically fund something, how do you still make sure that you get the same outcome?
Yeah, thanks, Lahiru. So, maybe we just take a step back and look at the relative sizes of different pots of funding that I think frames the challenge a bit clearly. So, across different issue areas, for every dollar that philanthropy spends, public dollars are about 26 times that. So basically, philanthropy funds something for 2 weeks, government can fund it for about a year. And the private sector, of course, is an even bigger stack to that. So I think part of the challenge is, how can we use the existing philanthropic dollars, which are growing with the growth of mega gifts, family offices, in a way that's catalytic to both the government side and the private sector side. So how exactly that's being done, I think, has included a lot of new mechanisms. Maybe I'll just mention two. First, on the getting governments in and making sure that the outcomes are still met. Results-based financing has been often used in this space now. And second, on getting the private sector in while ensuring outcomes, blended financing has been used. So what does that mean for each of these? On the outcomes-based financing side, the World Bank, for example, recently did something called the Rhino Bond, where basically they made sure that they paid for successful outcomes of rhino conservation. And what that helps to do is it helps to make the 80% of money today that exists, that I think Jan mentioned, from public funding, be spent more effectively. And so that's one way in which we can make sure that we close that gap. But beyond that, I think also there's this question of how do we get the private sector in a way that's accountable for outcomes? And that's where blended financing can be useful. So what blended finance does is it takes philanthropy or government money, and then it tries to use that to address some of the risk issues that sometimes come about in trying to make private sector investments. But as it does that, then it's really important for that philanthropy or the public money to also ask for certain types of impact outcomes in exchange, because why else should they subsidize the private sector? And the way in which that blended finance occurs is also important. So for example, in Asia, we help to structure a recyclable technical assistance facility that helps to do some of the upfront work for nature-based solutions in mangrove conservation, and in doing so helps to catalyze the private sector. But of course, then the bar that we set for the types of projects that we'd fund out of that is high, so that it makes sense for it to cross-subsidize the private sector that way. So zooming out, the net effect of that should be that for a small amount of philanthropy, we get to catalyze a large amount of private sector money while still achieving that impact.
Yeah, I think like Jan in CI's work as well, I think you have some of these things that Kevin is talking about, the catalytic funding that we need to get to the ground and going. The question is then, because we do know that there's a huge conservation issue, we need a lot of effort everywhere, and conservation organizations and governments alone are not enough to actually meet up the scale. If we're only talking about 2.5 billion right now, and that going up to 200 billion, you need a lot of people out there doing this. The question then comes down to, is there any way that, and I think it goes to Tom as well, is there any way that we can, the checks and balances that need to be there, because right now conservation organizations, governments doing it, it's under strict control, but now we need to scale it up. We need to ramp it up. We need the money, but at the same time, we need the capacity and the checks and balances. Maybe perhaps to all three speakers, what are those things that are on the philanthropy side? What can you have as a lever, and on the conservation and in the technology side? I guess we could start with Tom perhaps, and then move to Jan. Kevin?
Yeah, there's two things that I think are important. One is involving conservationists and scientists in the conversations around where financial flows end up going. Also involving indigenous peoples and communities that have been working and protecting biodiversity in their ranges of and homes and communities for centuries. This is really important to make sure that we're focusing our priorities on the right types of solutions that, one, will have an impact, and two, will not do inadvertent harm. And we as conservationists have tried many things historically, but that doesn't always get communicated all the way up into decision makers of capital flows or corporate organizations that deal with land, like in agriculture, food, and fiber. And so being able to work with conservationists, and this moves in both ways. This means that we need to, if you're a corporate or a financing institution, be bringing conservationists and organizations that are familiar with the science in to advise. And it also means from the conservation side that we need to be more fluent in different types of language and different understanding of opportunities and trade-offs, and be able to work in both cases. The second is that I think that we need to have more capacity for failure. And by capacity, I mean, we want to be able to try more innovative approaches. We also want to be able to be open about when things don't work. And where much of the thinking around limited pots of philanthropic or grant-based money has led to a very positive solutions focused, we have to talk about all of the benefits that the money that came through really drove. And some things that we do just don't really work. And we need to be able to both be vocal about the ones that don't super work so that others are able to learn from that and move forward. But we also need to be able to try new things and put money towards something that may or may not work. And then if it doesn't work, say, great, we have a portfolio approach, or we've tried other things as well, and we're going to focus and iterate quickly towards some of the things that do. So I think both the involvement of conservationists and the science that they've been working on for decades, and also additional capacity for understanding what success and failure means.
Yeah, I think just building on what Tom just said, and making a little bit of a plug for some of the work that Superorganism does. I mentioned earlier the role and importance of public and government funding, but I think that's retrospective. That's looking currently. I do think the public sector will continue to have a role, but in order to sort of fully capture the value and sort of the finance flows that private sector companies, whether corporates or financial institutions, can really contribute to the biodiversity conservation, to the biodiversity conversation, is really a couple of things, right? And you see now that governments, I sit here in Singapore, and I know that there's been a lot of momentum and energy around sort of better disclosures from corporates who have a footprint in Singapore, are listed in the Singapore Exchange, around voluntary adoption of things like TNFD, which will help, I think, give a little bit more visibility and transparency on the kinds of exposures corporates and financial sector actors have to nature-related issues, including biodiversity. Take a look at the impacts that some of these corporate activities are having, and then think about sort of that next step, right? So once we understand sort of the exposures, the impacts, and the risks, what are we doing in terms of the opportunities? And I think the TNFD, the current framework, really tries to push towards what are those solution sets. Just in our work and in our conversation with some of our corporate partners, one of the big sort of bottlenecks is not sort of the momentum and the energy and the willingness of corporations to contribute to biodiversity positive outcomes, but really the data that they need. So when you think about those material impacts or those material risks to these businesses, and we try to, using sort of an analog from climate, right, really thinking about the scope 3 type emissions within their supply chain on biodiversity and nature. Data is a huge thing, right? It's very difficult to measure sort of changes in biodiversity outcomes. And so, what I love about groups like Tom's at Superorganism and a lot of the folks who've been financing that kind of innovation is to really bring to bear innovation and tools which help to measure analyze and sort of produce insights that will be useful to both corporates in terms of their own activities and supply chain behaviors, for governments and the financial sector, to just say, within the portfolio of solutions, how are these working? And so it gets really back to, Tom's point about the importance of science and data in the design, but also to really think about what works and what doesn't. We need good data, and I think that we're at a good time technology-wise where we have tools that can help to facilitate that if we can bring these communities together.
Yes. And perhaps building on Jan's point then of getting data, I think the next level up then would be to create the right incentives based on those data. So, I think a lot of the approach so far has been to encourage companies to have a double bottom line. So there's the bottom line, and then essentially different types of levers to encourage them to not max profits. But another way to do this in the long run would be to condense the double bottom line. So price in the externalities of biodiversity and make a market for things like that. If we look again at the carbon markets, things like voluntary carbon credits are becoming popular. There are also, of course, regulated carbon credits, and those things have issues naturally. But I think a natural thing to see in 5 years' time, for example, would be the growth of biodiversity credits, or even social credits, healthcare credits. And there's a lot of exciting work that I see in that space, which will make it easier for companies to also justify to their shareholders why they are doing certain things.
Thank you. I think that, Kevin, you brought pretty much the hot topic at the moment, right? Which is carbon credits and biodiversity credits into the fray. And I'd like to have a small discussion about that as we round off, because it is pretty much one of the first mechanisms to allow corporates to invest in a landscape or some kind of environmental issue with a traceability mechanism inside it. Yes, there are criticisms of it, and I think that was the same for any kind of industry. And every time you hear about corruption on Wall Street or any kind of big stock exchange, that's going to happen, and we're just in the pains of an early market. But what can we actually do to give that confidence? Because philanthropy and governments have been investing in conservation all along. But the biggest issue is that we need to get to 90% of the funds that we need to do this. We need to go beyond philanthropy and this to get there. What kind of activities and what can we do to actually build that confidence in this, to get there? And I guess I'll open it to anyone to go on with that. And also at the same time, there are also these things that governments are doing which are not conducive to biodiversity either, right? So there's also the negative role of government and negative role of philanthropy as well, in a certain sense, right? How do we unpack that a little bit?
Well, I guess I can start on this. I think one of the reasons that biodiversity credits are so interesting in many ways to conservationists is because so much of the work that we have done historically has not been returns generating, in that it's not exactly paying major dividends to investors that are coming back for year on year with new money for huge returns. It's important and critical work that we need to continue to do, and it needs to be financed somehow. And biodiversity credits start to put that link together of why would a large corporate enterprise start to finance some of this work that needs to continue to happen on the ground, and funding is always limited. I think that one of the challenges that we see with the carbon markets, for example, is that the structures of the VCM and what needs to be done operationally to run a carbon project are very different skill sets than what may be existing in existing conservation organizations. And so as we go into biodiversity credits as well, we need to ensure that we're able to have those organizations that are already doing this work on preserving biodiversity, ecosystems, and species to be able to go through those methodologies and applications and really access that type of financing from some of the actual logistics happening through those organizations as well. And then if we're able to do that and socialize that, then we may be seeing some level of financing come through from those corporates. But where we're pretty interested is across that whole mitigation hierarchy, what happens before getting to those biocredits. What are we able to do working with those impacts, the scope 3s, whether it's insetting or focus on carbon, or however it is to work with those corporates to lower their impact on nature prior to the biodiversity credit buys. That's another interesting area for financing.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, and I think the mitigation hierarchy piece is a good segue, because I think within the broader conversation around biodiversity credits and offsets, there's some rich discussion that's being had. I think, as a first step, where you have the right regulatory frameworks to allow for things like habitat or biodiversity offsets, that's still a tool that I think, could, be a little bit more mainstream, particularly when we talk about infrastructure projects that are financed either by the private sector or by bilateral or multilateral donors or national governments. I think making that a little bit more of a requirement for receiving financing for that kind of infrastructure, to say that, in the event that you cannot avoid or minimize the damage, that this will become part of the way that infrastructure is done, and infrastructure financing will prioritize at least, offsetting, the harmful impacts of these types of infrastructure developments. That's one end of the spectrum. And I think a lot of the sort of global conversation and dialogue around what this looks like, that's involving the NGOs, the financial sector, different regulatory bodies around voluntary biodiversity credits. I still come back to, it is, to Kevin's point, a form, and maybe an imperfect form, of really trying to put a value on those externalities that have just been ignored. So I think, even though there's a lot of work to still be done, and there's a lot of controversy, over what the design of these mechanisms look like, how do we get to high integrity, high quality biodiversity credits and projects, it's a conversation worth having. And so, from our perspective, it is a good thing to see, because in absence of sort of these new mechanisms, we're still talking about the same things and the same challenges. So, we're quite supportive of the shaping of those markets where, equity, high integrity, and high quality, are really at the fore of those conversations. Turn for maybe Kevin.
Yeah, I'm often reminded in this conversation about Joe Biden's quote, that don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. So I think that in this case, the alternative of doing this is often governments or philanthropists have to kind of individually assess things and pick winners. And actually, maybe that's not as perfect either. And what I often see coming from the social and healthcare space when I come to the biodiversity conferences is, people say, hey, we have it really tough to create the biodiversity credits, because unlike those carbon guys, they've just got one metric, we've got 4. And the social guys have 40, right? So I actually think that it's really interesting to see how a lot of the tools that have been used to create common standards, address additionality, can be ported from across the different sectors to address some of the skill set gaps and the framework gaps that exist. It's really interesting to see how different sectors have just tried to solve the same problem using different tools. And there's a real convergence that I'm starting to see, which I think could help to push the biodiversity credit conversation forward.
Yeah, and since we're just about out of time, I guess I'd leave it to the floor to just give your last thoughts on financing it overall. I think that we've had a really good discussion on where the money can come from, where it can go, and what could actually create the confidence in the market to make this really happen. And I'll leave you with that, and I'll pass to the other panelists.
I'll just say on that last note that I think one of the most encouraging things that we see are where we're seeing new asset classes, like real assets or venture funds or nature-based solutions, and also solution types and startups and new internal innovations and initiatives within corporates that are driving towards nature. It seems in a very exciting time.
Yeah, I would concur with Tom. I mean, I think it's been really exciting to see, as somebody who works at that intersection of conservation, on the ground in countries and with the financial sector, the fact that biodiversity, we're having so many conversations about biodiversity, the fact that we are discussing what those controversies are with respect to these new financial mechanisms is to me, a source of optimism. So, I think a panel like this and hopefully the rest of the species conference, there will be, similar panels and similar discussions. And so, just thank the organizers for, hosting this really important conversation.
Likewise, I think the creation of a whole spectrum of capital, from philanthropy to investing to something in between, and all of that willing to try different things for biodiversity has been a real encouragement. So that opens up the solution space. We haven't got the answers yet, but I think the fundamentals are there for us to do so.
Thank you so much to everyone that was involved in that really, really fascinating panel. There are just so many different aspects of financing biodiversity for all of us to think about. But I think you can clearly see that there is a trend that's really starting to develop amongst various different talks that we're having throughout this Congress, which is that we should be open to failure and basically sharing what we're learning from our failures in order to take these positive steps forward for conservation. And I think it's safe to say that the more transparent we are, not just with ourselves, but also with the general public all around the world, who obviously we want to have invested interest in conservation, about what we're learning, but also what we are failing with, and also how we're continuing to progress off the back of these failings, I think the more likely we are to get people involved in conservation and continuously pique their interest. Now, I just want to remind everyone that for those that were paneling, if you do have any questions that you want to put towards them, please, by all means, put them into the chat, because the panelists will be staying on to respond to any questions that you have in the chat room on the presentation page. So by all means, please do that. But now I would like to introduce John Paul Rodriguez, the chair of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, to basically take forward a discussion as we think about the future generation of conservationists and passing the torch.
Hi, Jimmy. It's really, really great to see you here. Here at the IUCN Species Survival Commission, one of the biggest priorities that we have is to increase the diversity of the leadership and the membership. And by increasing diversity, I mean, having gender balance and youth represented and taxonomy and geography. And when I say represented, I don't mean this in terms of ticking a box of saying, we've got so many from such country. I really mean having active participation. I believe firmly that unless you have everybody on the table discussing and presenting their point of view, we get conservation wrong. So it's just simply not good enough to just have a few people representing the different points of view. I have a great friend who used to say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I really, really think that's absolutely true. So it's great that you joined SSC and helped us establish the Young Professional Task Force. And I was wondering, if you could share with us your experience doing this and the growth that this sector has had within SSC. It's one of the biggest, fastest growing sections of our commission. So great to have you here. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experience about all of this.
Thank you so much, John. So hi everyone, my name is Jimmy. I'm from Malaysia. So it has been a very precious for the invitation to join these conversations for me, because as a representative for the youth for the IUCN SSC, and also we recently created the Young Professional Task Force for this group. So as John said, it's very important to incorporate the young voices in this innovative work, especially around the world. We are creating a space for the young and the youth to raise their voice, to give their opinion in this. And this Young Professional Task Force is going to be real change for the IUCN and also for the SSC, to give a platform for the young people to include their experience and also their perspective and also their opinions in this conservation world. So according to my experience, I joined the IUCN SSC as a co-chair with my colleagues, Coach Sakina, around 2 years ago. So initially, before we set up the task force, we have the group called the Young Professional Group within the IUCN SSC. So sooner we gather the opinion from the young members and young professionals within the SSC group, so to listen to what they want in the conservation area, and also the perspective and also the aspect within the IUCN. So we set up the Young Professional Task Force to give them a platform for them to get the mentorship and also to raise their voice within the IUCN.
It's very important because in SSC, it's a network of experts. The world's experts on species conservation, organized around taxonomic groups, geographic groups, disciplinary groups. But the challenge of having a global network of experts is that you have to become an expert to be invited to join the commission. And usually becoming an expert as a scientist or a similar profession takes years. So it takes often more than 10 or 20 years of a career. And that was a big limitation for younger professionals to join, because until they were recognized as global experts, they were not able to be invited to a specialist group. So in addition to the task force, we created national species specialist groups as part of the reverse the red strategy to bring in new talent. And national species specialist groups, again, are able to include young professionals that might not yet be globally expert, but are playing an important role nationally. It also allows them to speak their own language in these national species specialist groups, not having to speak in English. So these are the kinds of strategies that we are applying. And tell me, if somebody wants to join the Young Professional Task Force, what's the process? What kind of a filtering or selection, or what kind of process do you follow?
So I agree with you, John, regarding we should include all the young members within the IUCN SSC and also in the IUCN within this task force. So initially when we set up the task force, we found it a little bit hard and difficult because of the age limit, because for the young people it's actually range for 18 to 35. And also there are various of background and diverse of experience for these members. So based on the discussion with the secretariat and also the members and the youth members within this IUCN SSC, so we kind of agree that we set down the bar to just include all the young members within this group, no matter their background and experience, just to give them a chance to involve themselves in this conservation network.
Yeah, and how many members do you have so far? From which countries do they come? How's the kind of distribution at this time?
Okay, so currently we have 116 members within the IUCN SSC Young Professional Task Force. Majority they come from Asia country, Africa, Europe, and America. We are lack of members from Oceania part and also from another Antarctica and Arctic parts. So majority they are from these countries.
Yeah, no, we have to work. Oceania is a big challenge for SSC membership in general. I mean, if you remove Australia and New Zealand as from Oceania, we have very few left. So that's certainly a big priority. Now, one thing that I always wonder with a young professional, I mean, it has an expiration date. There's a point where you stop being a young professional. I don't know if you have an age limit for the group, but what is your vision for? How do you deal with this? I mean, what happens when people become too old to be members of the group? What's the next stage in your vision for SSC?
That's exactly a very good question, because actually I'm off the limit of this age. Based on the discussion with the members, they allow me to still take this position because it's still newly built, and we set up the task force with Sakina. So what we discuss is after you off the limits of 35 age, you are not being kicked out straight away from this group, but you automatically become the mentor for the young people in this group. So for those off the limit of 35, you're over the age of 35, you still become the member, but you become the mentor for all the young people in this task force.
And do you have any kind of explicit mechanism for contacting leaders and other specialist groups and saying, I have this really good 35-year-old that works with butterflies. Would you consider them? I mean, do you do that kind of negotiating with other chairs, and how do you connect to other groups?
Yeah, so because of the task force is just newly formed, we are in the process of targeting that, but thanks to the IUCN Engage platform, actually we have looked at it and we have found that actually we provide the same platform to offer the mentorship and also the opportunity or any questions they raised by any people, including the youth, and then for them to find the correct experience mentorship within this IUCN network.
Now, also IUCN beyond SSC, more like, I don't know if our listeners know, or viewers, SSC is a commission of experts that sits within the bigger IUCN, which is a large organization with members and with secretariat. And IUCN has a youth strategy of its own as an organization. What is your participation in the youth strategy, and how do you engage with the bigger IUCN picture?
Yeah, sure. So actually, IUCN, because they are during the forming of this Young Profession Task Force and also the youth strategy that developed and published by IUCN, actually one of the key point and gaps is the communication between the different commissions, because different commissions, they do have their own young professional groups. So what IUCN now they set up is they formed the Youth Advisory Committee. So between all the commissions, they select a representative from these different commissions. So they can communicate with each other and form the network together with all the commissions.
Yeah, well, obviously, it's really important to have a good, strong youth group within the union at every level, and the commissions and the membership, because ultimately, the people like me in a few years will be gone. So we need to have a good replacement generation there. I believe that we're probably reaching sort of the end of our allotted time for this segment. I wanted to thank you for all the work you do for SSC and the time you devote to it and to making it grow. But I was wondering if you have any kind of final message, any final words that you would like to share with our viewers.
Yeah.
And with the youth of the world.
Sure. So to IUCN SSC, or to IUCN as a whole organization, because again, I'm off the limit of this youth group, but the message I want to leave is this Young Professional Task Force is really important and useful to gain the voice. So we don't want this task force to just become a tool or just advertisement to be done only for the IUCN, but a real platform that can be utilized by all the youth and young professionals to get their experience and mentorship and raise their voice in this network.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for participating in the segment, and hope you continue enjoying the World Species Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitations and also the chances given for me to give a little bit of my opinion in this, and hope you have a successful Congress. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John Paul and Jimmy. It's wonderful to have a new Young Professionals Task Force. And one of the goals of this World Species Congress is to generate meaningful impact action to accelerate conservation. We've built a resource library for young professionals that is filled with all kinds of toolkits, links, articles, future webinars that you can sign up for to learn more about and dive deeper into aspects of these strategies for success. So please find a bit of time and head to your resources page and engage with the tools that you can help to expand and refine your conservation strategies. If you really enjoyed a particular talk, resource from a presenter, then all of it will be linked to the presentation page. And of course, don't forget, as you see these QR codes popping up throughout this World Species Congress, and of course, you see all of the talks and panels, be sure to scan them, but also at the same time, put any questions that you have towards any panels and presenters into the chats, because they will come back to you. Coming up next, we have species conservation in Brazil from a few different perspectives. We'll hear from the conservation, we'll hear a conversation with Marcelino de Oliveira with Chico Mendes, the Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, and we have many more species conservation success stories and discussions. So by all means, please stay tuned.
Olá, meu nome é Eugênia Cordero, eu estou representando o Centro de Sobrevivência de Espécies Brasil e vou contar para vocês como que colaboramos na conservação de espécies aqui no Brasil, que é um país não só mega diverso, mas também um país muito apaixonante. O Brasil abriga a maior biodiversidade do mundo e é o segundo país com mais espécies endêmicas. Dentro disso tudo, temos mais de 100 mil espécies de fauna, mais de 40 mil espécies de flora, entre 8 mil e 600 mil espécies de fungos, dependendo da estimativa que você utilize, é claro. Mas tudo isso é um cenário completamente apaixonante e me sinto muito privilegiada de poder estar trabalhando com essas espécies. Só que, claro, essa grande biodiversidade traz consigo muitos desafios e responsabilidades. E isso pode ou te paralisar ou te movimentar. E o movimento é o mais necessário nessa situação atual. E foi isso que o Parque das Aves fez. Com seu compromisso de conservação, ele decidiu ser sede do Centro de Sobrevivência de Espécies Brasil, junto com 2 cofundadores, que é a Comissão de Sobrevivência de Espécies, da IUCN, e o Grupo Especialista em Planejamento de Conservação, o CPCG, também da IUCN. E em 2019, fundaram o nosso centro, que se inseria no Brasil, né, que é um país que tem uma estrutura de conservação muito bem estabelecida e muito, muito admirável. Por um lado, o governo é responsável por fazer a lista vermelha das espécies ameaçadas, fazer os planos de ação nacional e também tem bases de dados e sistemas de informação muito robustos e importantes. E, por outro lado, temos uma sociedade civil completamente engajada desde diferentes setores, sumamente engajadas com conservação. E aí, então, surge a pergunta, né? Como podemos criar um centro que seja respeituoso com a estrutura pré-existente, mas que também seja funcional e estratégico? Então, o nosso centro trabalha com o ciclo de conservação de espécies, que é avaliar, planejar, agir, trabalhar em redes e comunicar. Eu vou contar para vocês um pouquinho das ações que a gente faz. Uma das primeiras coisas que mais nos orgulham é esse acordo que a gente assinou junto com o governo, com o ICMBio especificamente, que é um acordo que contempla questões de avaliação, questões de planejamento e muito trabalho em redes. Na parte de avaliação, a gente trabalha muito com treinamentos e capacitações, trabalhamos muito na integração também da lista vermelha nacional com a lista vermelha global, principalmente focado em espécies endêmicas. Trabalhamos também na organização e facilitação de oficinas de planejamento para conservação, graças às ferramentas e processos do CPCG. E, por outro lado, temos o Parque das Aves, que é a entidade que implementa várias dessas ações que saem dos planejamentos, e vocês veem esses números aí super baixinhos, né? São os números de população dessas espécies que aos poucos, graças ao Parque das Aves e a outros parceiros, esses números têm ido aumentando. E tudo é possível graças ao trabalho em redes, graças a muitas pessoas trabalhando juntas, comunicando com muito respeito e colaborando, porque necessitamos uma mudança, e essa mudança é possível, mas cada um de nós tem que fazer a nossa parte. No final, todos somos um. Muito obrigada.
Olá, eu sou Fabiana Rocha, coordenadora do Centro de Sobrevivência de Espécies Brasil, da União Internacional para a Conservação da Natureza, Comissão de Sobrevivência de Espécies. Estou aqui com o privilégio de entrevistar Marcelino, que ele é diretor de pesquisa, avaliação e monitoramento da biodiversidade pelo Instituto Chico Mendes de Conservação da Biodiversidade, o ICMBio. O ICMBio ele tem um papel fundamental no Brasil de estabelecer as políticas públicas e também os compromissos nacionais e internacionais para a conservação da biodiversidade. Nessa entrevista de hoje, a gente vai explorar as iniciativas do Brasil em relação à Meta 4 da Convenção Biológica da Biodiversidade. Então, Marcelo, muito obrigada por estar aqui com a gente hoje. E eu queria te perguntar, então, quais são as iniciativas do Brasil para cumprir os compromissos da Meta 4?
Bom, a gente tem que começar pelo próprio processo de avaliação do risco de extinção, que é um processo que é conduzido pelo governo brasileiro, né, com os critérios da IUCN. A gente não abandona esses critérios, muito pelo contrário, né? A gente defende o uso dos critérios da IUCN, e é um processo de bastante consolidado, que envolve mais de 1.000 pesquisadores de 200 instituições do Brasil e fora do Brasil. E é um processo em que a gente procura avaliar o máximo possível das espécies de toda a biodiversidade brasileira, que é enorme.
Quantas espécies o ICMBio já avaliou?
A gente já avaliou até o momento 15.000 espécies, sendo da fauna, sendo 100% dos vertebrados, animais vertebrados, e cerca de 5.000 invertebrados, que são de alguma maneira estratégicos e importantes para a conservação. Essa avaliação é submetida, né, por meio de um relatório científico ao Ministério do Ambiente, e a partir daí é produzida uma lista nacional, né, oficial das espécies ameaçadas de extinção, que as tornam objetivamente e automaticamente protegidas.
Ou seja, vocês geram a lista nacional de espécies ameaçadas e isso vira uma política pública com todos os seus desdobramentos. Todos os desdobramentos, principalmente de proteção a essas espécies. Além disso, nós desenvolvemos os planos de ação, né? A partir dessa lista, nós desenvolvemos planos de ação voltados para a conservação dessas espécies, no sentido de identificar ações objetivas que possam ajudar na sua conservação. Também procuramos atingir o máximo possível das espécies. No momento, nós temos 45 planos de ação em curso. Isso inclui quantos por cento das espécies?
80% das espécies, mais de 1.000 espécies. E, de novo, é um plano, é uma construção coletiva que envolve vários atores estratégicos para a conservação das espécies, não só especialistas, né, mas também pessoas da iniciativa privada, empreendedores, todos aqueles que possam estrategicamente ser importantes para a conservação da espécie. Nesse momento nós temos mais de 3.500 ações em curso acontecendo, né, e conservando esse número que falei de pouco mais de 1.000 espécies.
Marcelo, pegando esse gancho, né, dos planos de ação nacional serem uma construção coletiva, como participante, como especialista, né, dos PANs, sou super fã da forma que vocês fazem, porque vocês fazem sempre uma construção coletiva com vários atores, tanto da sociedade civil, organizações não governamentais, zoológicos e iniciativa privada também. Poderia me destacar, então, alguma iniciativa de sucesso dessa parceria entre as diferentes instituições e o governo para a implementação desses planos de ação nacional?
Eu acho que todos os planos, de alguma maneira, eles têm esse envolvimento, mas eu acho que vale a pena destacar o plano de conservação dos primatas do Sudeste, né, da Mata Atlântica, e deles o mico-leão dourado, que é o Leontoptex rosalia, que é uma espécie icônica, não só para o Brasil, mas para o mundo todo. Tá? E é uma espécie que há muito tempo já há uma parceria muito forte entre o governo, que faz o trabalho de conservação, de gestão das áreas protegidas, onde essas espécies estão, e a Associação Mico-leão dourado e outros parceiros de zoológicos, de universidades, que estão envolvidos no manejo dessa espécie. Então, acho que esse é um exemplo assim, o mais refinado que a gente tem, né, entre tantos outros bons exemplos, né, mas acho que esse é o mais refinado de uma parceria, né, de uma parceria bastante harmônica, né, de ações de conservação, ações que são de parte de governo e ações que são parte da sociedade civil.
Poderia me destacar uma ferramenta inovadora que o CMBio vem desenvolvendo?
Temos uma grande aposta em termos de conservação, que são os planos de redução de impactos na biodiversidade, que, diferente dos PANs, eles são planos focados, voltados inteiramente para o vetor de ameaça, né, para os grandes vetores de ameaça. As grandes atividades humanas que geram ameaça para as espécies, como a mineração, a produção de energia hidráulica, as estradas, rodovias e ferrovias, a gente vem buscando desenvolver esses planos da mesma forma, sempre em parceria, né, envolvendo não só pesquisadores como ambientalistas, mas principalmente o próprio setor responsável por esses empreendimentos. E a ideia é que a gente consiga entender qual é realmente o impacto que esses empreendimentos causam às espécies, quais são as espécies realmente sensíveis a esse empreendimento, tentar localizá-las dentro do espaço e, a partir daí, mostrar, assim, em termos bem gerais, bem genéricos, assim, o custo ambiental que é você fazer empreendimento numa área que você tem uma concentração grande de alvos de conservação. Ao passo, o quanto é menor o custo ambiental se você fizer numa área com menor número de alvos de conservação.
Então, na prática, isso seria assim, por exemplo, eu tenho uma estrada e aí essa ferramenta me mostraria em quais áreas essa estrada causaria menos impacto, um menor custo ambiental.
Qual é a alternativa que seria, do ponto de vista ambiental, a de menor impacto?
Sim,
né?
Isso é genial, porque isso reduz os custos do empreendedor já antes, na etapa de planejamento. O empreendedor,
na etapa de planejamento, ele entende, ele pode enxergar o custo que ele terá se ele investir num empreendimento numa área com muito alta de conservação. Os estudos serão mais caros, as medidas de conservação serão mais caras, a gente aponta isso para ele. Porque Os estudos e as medidas de mitigação aos impactos da biodiversidade são, dos aspectos relacionados a um licenciamento ambiental do empreendimento, são os mais caros.
Nossa, fantástico. Marcelo, muito obrigada pelas suas informações valiosíssimas. A gente fica muito feliz em ver os avanços e ansiosos para saber dos novos resultados e iniciativas do ICMBio e também como o IUCN do movimento Reverse the Red. A gente fica aqui à disposição para auxiliar vocês no que for preciso. Contem conosco e muito obrigada.
Nós que agradecemos a oportunidade de estar aqui conversando com vocês e podermos apresentar nossas atividades, nossos produtos, né, que nós estamos fazendo.
Muito obrigada. E quem quiser saber mais sobre o PRIM, a gente vai disponibilizar também para o Congresso um link do PRIM, um vídeo e também alguns dos documentos. Muito obrigada.
Again, thank you so much to everyone for all of their talks and the panels that we're experiencing here at the Reverse the Red World Species Congress. If you're just joining, then we still have loads of amazing talks coming up. And if you've been tuning in for hours, then I really hope you're really enjoying the various different topics that are being covered across this entire Congress. Now, for those of you who may have any questions, by all means, please enter the chat, because some of the presenters from the last talks are actually going to be sticking around to answer any questions that you do have. So please make sure you're engaging in that way. I just want to take a moment to thank all of the sponsors that have allowed for this World Species Congress to happen. Your support really means the world, not just to obviously everyone who's involved in making this Congress happen, but also to all the wildlife species that obviously we're hoping to help off the back of this through all the actions that we're going to be that are going to be put forward off the back of this Congress. Now, I would also like to say that coming up, we have a word from one of our, in particular, event partners, the Disney Conservation Fund. And then off the back of that, we have ex situ strategies for frog recovery. So I hope you enjoy the upcoming talks.
They thrill us. Make us laugh. And make us cry. They make us think.
She's beautiful.
Inspire us. And teach us. Most importantly, they connect us to the world of nature. And right now, more than ever, they need us.
Through our efforts here at the park at Disney's Animal Kingdom to share the stories, and our efforts in the field to truly make a difference scientifically in the community and with the animals themselves, our end goal is that we truly make a difference for those animals in the wild.
The Disney Conservation Fund is proud to celebrate and protect the wildlife we share our planet with. From our experiences and dedication to animal care, to our work to save wildlife and our support of conservation heroes, the Disney Conservation Fund is committed to ensuring a world where wildlife thrives and inspiring all of us to treasure and protect the magic of nature.
We blend the love of nature and a respect for animals that Walt Disney always had himself with making dreams come true, getting people excited about nature and about being out in the wild.
Every single one of us matters and has a role to play. Every single day we make a difference. Let's learn to live in peace and harmony between nations, cultures, religions, and between us and Mother Nature.
At Disney, we're not just talking about helping the animals that share our planet, we're doing something about it. Join us by taking action in your own community to save wildlife, inspire action, and protect the planet.
Olá, eu sou a Cibele, eu sou bióloga e coordenadora do setor de répteis, anfíbios e invertebrados do Zoológico de São Paulo e também sou presidente regional do Grupo de Especialistas em Anfíbios do Brasil, da IUCN. Hoje vou contar brevemente sobre os programas de conservação ex situ que são desenvolvidos aqui no Brasil com anfíbios. O Brasil possui a maior diversidade de anfíbios do mundo, possuindo atualmente 1.188 espécies. Dessas, 59 estão inseridas em alguma categoria de ameaça na nossa lista nacional. Essas e mais algumas espécies foram avaliadas pela ferramenta da Amphibianarch Conservation Needs Assessments, sendo identificadas 14 espécies prioritárias para conservação, com necessidade de resgate para o manejo ex situ. No Brasil, essa estratégia ainda é muito recente. Atualmente, temos apenas 4 programas em andamento, todos eles com envolvimento do Zoológico de São Paulo. Todos esses programas são integrados e estão inseridos em algum plano de ação nacional ou então internacional. O primeiro deles, pioneiro no Brasil, é com a perereca de alcatrazes e ele teve início em 2009. Esse programa já está bem consolidado e passou por diversas frentes de atuação em conservação. Atualmente, temos uma população estável de cerca de 100 indivíduos. Recentemente, também publicamos um artigo contando todos os detalhes sobre o desenvolvimento desse programa e também sobre seus alcances. Em 2022, devido ao empenho das ações in situ, essa espécie passou de criticamente em perigo para vulnerável. O segundo programa, com a perereca pintada, teve início em 2019. A população ex situ dessa espécie foi estabelecida no Centro de Conservação da Fauna Silvestre do Estado de São Paulo e atualmente também é mantida no Zoológico de São Paulo. Esse programa já está bem avançado, com protocolo de manutenção e reprodução estabelecido. No momento, as ações do plano estratégico da espécie estão em andamento para possibilitar reverter o grau de ameaça dessa espécie. O terceiro programa é com a perereca rústica e teve início em 2022, com os primeiros fundadores da espécie sendo transferidos para dar início à população ex situ no Parque das Aves, com apoio técnico do Zoológico de São Paulo. Até o momento, a espécie ainda não reproduziu, mas a manutenção tem se mostrado adequada. E essa espécie também tem um plano estratégico em andamento. O último programa, conduzido no Zoológico de São Paulo, que também teve início em 2022, é com o sapo arlequim manauense. Esse programa ainda está na fase de desenvolvimento de protocolo de manutenção e reprodução com a espécie análoga Atelopus rugimudi. E esse trabalho vem sendo desenvolvido no âmbito da Iniciativa de Sobrevivência dos Atelopus. E como perspectiva, no momento estamos trabalhando em um projeto para que no futuro breve possamos nos transformar em um centro de sobrevivência de anfíbios e manejar populações ex situ de espécies prioritárias para conservação aqui do Brasil. Deixo aqui meus agradecimentos a todos os meus parceiros, que são muitos, e que têm possibilitado o acontecimento desses programas. Muito obrigada pela atenção de vocês e eu deixo aqui o meu contato. Até mais.
Thank you so much, Claire and Sibyl, for those fantastic presentations. Now, remember, this is truly a global event for this Reverse the Red World Species Congress. We have people who are logging in from over 190 countries. So please take this opportunity to grow your network and learn different things about species that you may not know anything about, but at the same time, also use this as an opportunity to share your knowledge with people all over the world. This truly is a really remarkable event. Now, we're going to move from animal talks into plants and fungi, because coming up, we have talks on the conservation efforts from the Rio Botanical Garden and also fungi from Brazil.
Spawning aggregations are really spectacles of nature. They're very similar to things like the migrations and the gatherings of wildebeest and zebra and monarch butterflies. I mean, they're spectacular events.
Most large, commercially important reef fish, snappers, groupers, jacks, all migrate great distances and aggregate to spawn in single places at very specific times. It's like a productivity hotspot So much activity is taking place.
When they aggregate to spawn, they're really easy to catch. So a lot of these species have been plundered during their spawning aggregations, and they can no longer sustain their population throughout the whole region.
The aggregation is the only time that the reef fish reproduce. If they can't reproduce, you don't have the next generation. If you don't have the next generation, you don't have the fishery, and you don't have the food, and you can't support the livelihood.
If I can catch 100 pounds of fish, why should I go and catch 300-pound fish? Because I'm only going to sell one.
When they land that many fish, too, the price goes way down, so they're not getting a whole lot for them anyway.
Pan para hoy y hambre para mañana. Entonces, hay que saber también contribuirle a la naturaleza.
Local and regional economies depend on large snappers, groupers, jacks, not only in the fishing industry, commercial, but also in the sport fishing industry, the diving industries, the snorkel industries.
It's just a matter of finding the right way to do it, so it's a win-win for everybody.
El intercambio de información, incluso preferiblemente el trabajo conjunto, puede ser aprovechado por todos y debe contribuir tanto a la protección de los recursos como al aprovechamiento sustentable de los mismos.
If you want people to take care of more of what they have and leave back things, get new alternatives.
Thus the need to organize fishers, build capacity, and effectively engage in representation.
Well, they need to get on board on the regulatory process and get involved in it, get some decent rules and regulations going. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to pass this livelihood down that's been so important to you, to your children and grandchildren. It's going to be over.
If I don't fish responsibly, I won't have any tomorrow. And I'd love to fish tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Alex Pearson. I'm an impact producer with HHMI Tangled Bank Studios, and I will be your moderator for this session. As this community knows, we are in the midst of the United Nations Ocean Decade, which has ambitious goals for reversing declines in ocean health and creating new opportunities for sustainable development. The success of this global effort will impact the survival of marine life and the security of the more than 3 billion people who rely on the ocean for their food and livelihood. How do we recover and protect fish species that are both critical for reef health, but also commercially important to communities? In this session, we'll dive into the value of community engagement in marine conservation efforts, specifically looking at the management of marine protected areas and conservation of fish spawning aggregation sites. I'm excited to introduce you to our esteemed panel. First, we have Ana Salceda, who loves telling stories about the ocean and its people and relies on the power of storytelling to catalyze social change and species recovery. Next, we have Dr. Judy Manlay. Judy loves fish and people, which is why she's dedicated her career to helping people to care for the ocean and fish. And next, we have Dr. Stephanie Bolden, who applies the biology of vulnerable species to identify conservation strategies, and she smiles happily when fish are around. I'm excited to kick it off with some project introductions. Anna, let's start with you. Tell us about the Big Fish Initiative. We just saw a video from your campaign right before the session started off. What are your goals and who are you working with to achieve them?
So thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. The Big Fish Initiative is an impact campaign by the Spawning Aggregation Working Group. This is FAO Fisheries for the Western Central Atlantic. And we are focused on the protection of fish spawning aggregations, specifically in the wider Caribbean, our campaign, and the sustainable management of all the species that aggregate to spawn in this region. So as I said, this is an initiative by the working group endorsed by FAO, but we have an incredible group of partners from NOAA Fisheries, the Fisheries Council in the regions, specifically the Caribbean Fisheries Management Council, ESPA, more than 50 organizations, including fishers organizations and many NGOs, of course, and an incredible set of very talented researchers and experts on fishing and all kinds of big fish things.
Excellent. And Judy, you are similarly working to not only engage, but empower communities to lead in marine conservation efforts. Tell us about why you started MPA Day and what you hope increased public awareness of marine protected areas achieves.
Thanks, Alex. And so great to be on this really fish and marine protected area, two passions together on one panel, which is really great. So it really started in about 2018 when in South Africa we had 20 new marine protected areas ready to be proclaimed. The scientists had been working on them. They'd done all the community engagement. They just needed the signature. And the signature from the government wasn't happening. And we just couldn't work out what was going on. So we decided to really start raising awareness about marine protected areas. And we did a little bit of research in our aquarium. At that stage, I was working in Durban at the Durban Aquarium, and we found that 80% of our visitors couldn't name one marine protected area in South Africa. And that made us realize that although we were passionate about marine protected areas, most people have never heard of them. They don't even know that we have these special nature reserves in the ocean. So we were thinking, how do we raise awareness about marine protected areas? And we know that there are special days like World Environment Day, Biodiversity Day, Reverse the Red Day, World Ocean Day. And these days work really well to increase awareness about particular issues. So we thought, well, there isn't a Marine Protected Areas Day. Why don't we start one? So that's what we did in 2021. We got together a group of passionate conservationists from around our South African coast. We have zero budget, but we had a lot of passion. And that's really what started MPA Day. We started small in the middle of COVID, and we're still growing. And our goal is to stress the importance of marine protected areas for people. So often when we talk about protected areas, we talk about protected areas for the environment or for nature. Our aim is to really focus on what marine protected areas can do to help people and to help communities. And that's how we tie the two together. So it's really helping to empower communities to understand marine protected areas better and to use them more effectively.
Excellent. It's amazing what you can get done when you start with passion. So I'd love to dig into MPAs a bit too. Anna, let's start with you on this. Once a marine protected area has been established, who needs to be involved in the management and the enforcement? And how do you build and sustain an MPA-focused coalition?
Who doesn't, right? We need all the stakeholders working together, and that's part of what we do. The Big Fish Initiative is the communication component of the Regional Fish Spawning Aggregations Management Plan. And the idea is to work, get fishers, of course, it's our main target audience, decision makers, which includes lawmakers, fisheries managers, enforcement officials, and of course, all the people working to protect locally those places and at the regional level. And we need to include and get the public involved. We call it, that's our third target audience. These are fish consumers or people from Europe and the US or any other parts of the world that come to the Caribbean on vacation, and they need to contribute by not eating fish that are aggregated to spawn, right? So we need to have everybody involved. As it's not a secret that in the Caribbean we have a problem with enforcement, right? We try, we keep working, but it's something that it's a serious challenge. That's why getting fishers involved in this initiative is key for us. Not only get them involved in the decision-making process, but also in the research and, of course, the monitoring and the management of all this, right? Because we are asking them not to fish during the spawning time. Well, we need to give them some capacity building and to provide some alternative livelihoods. And there are places in Mexico and Belize where the fishers are working with scientists hand to hand and do the monitoring of these aggregations during spawning times. And you know, that's a way to compensate the not fishing during this time. So we need everybody involved, and having the fishers on our side is the way to go to compensate for the challenges of enforcement and to get long-term results.
Excellent. And Judy, in thinking about short-term and long-term success of an MPA, what does the ideal role of a coastal community look like? And walk us through a bit about what this outreach and trust building work looks like with community leaders.
It's building.
I think, Alex, so that's such a critical question. And I think that in terms of what Anna has said, what I'm finding amazing is that Anna's in the Caribbean and we're in South Africa, and yet the principles are exactly the same. So in a perfect world, fishermen would be involved in the entire process. So they would be involved in identifying where the MPA should go. They should be involved in the development of the management plan and then the implementation of that management plan. But we don't live in a perfect world. And I think that now our challenge is to work with the fisheries managers and with the MPA managers and to help support them to engage with communities. In many MPA situations, we're moving from a very strong enforcement-driven management to a community-driven management. And it's a paradigm shift. We're all learning new ways of doing things. So it's saying to the managers and working with the managers and empowering them to work with communities. There are never going to be enough conservation professionals and fisheries scientists and us around. We have to work with the managers. They're on the ground. They're the ones who are at the coalface. How can we support them to engage with their communities? How can we help them to listen to their communities, to understand what are their challenges, and then together create benefits from the MPAs? I don't know if we've really thought creatively enough about the multiple benefits that people could get from MPAs. And as mentioned, working with the scientists, so fishermen working with scientists to monitor. There's nothing like seeing a spawning aggregation come back to help convince fishermen, okay, this conservation stuff does work. Our marine protectors in South Africa, we've seen spillover into the areas adjacent to those MPAs. And the fishermen are now fishing the line because they know that they can catch more fish there. So they're starting to see that. But that takes time. And in the interim, before they start seeing those benefits, we need to look at what are other benefits that the communities can get, being part of research, being paid to use their boats in the research. Are there tourism opportunities we can identify? We need to find those tangible benefits for communities. We're saying don't fish, but what are we giving them in return? And I think that that's really what we've got to look at. So it's a long process, but I think that empowering the managers is a critical component in this process.
Absolutely.
So Stephanie, I want to turn to you to think about policymaker engagement in all of this. Now that we've sort of looked at community engagement, what is, moving from the grassroots to grass tops. Once an MPA has been created, is there typically a need for ongoing political advocacy or further legislation? If so, how do you sustain engagement with policymakers?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for this invitation on this wonderful official panel that we're talking today about MPAs. I'm happy to be here. I think you ask a hard question, Alex, but I think that there's a lot of answers. And as my colleagues have talked about, the importance of community. Some MPAs have sunset clauses. Some MPAs end up just being paper parks. And so there's an important role for the policymakers. Not only do they draw the lines on the map and declare that this should be an MPA, but it's more of a three-legged stool. You've got the policymakers, you have the researchers, and you have the community that Anna and Judy were talking about. And all those things need to work together in order for there to be an effective feedback to show how the MPA is working. And the policymakers also have an important job of setting goals. And that's how it brings in the fishers and the researchers. The policymakers or the managers set a goal, then they have to identify how to conduct the research or the monitoring to reply to that goal, and then have a feedback loop to the community to show, as Judy said, that there are increases and there are benefits to these important areas. Another thing that's important is sometimes there's emerging threats. So as we know, the oceans have been warming and the corals have been taking a hit. So that's an emerging threat that's happening a lot in our MPAs that we might need to reanalyze our goals and increase our monitoring, our research in that area. And then also there's a great opportunity amongst MPAs for migration and movement through networks of MPAs. And so it's not just one single circle on a map, but it's a series of circles, or, on land, we talk about wildlife corridors. And I think that MPAs also can have that beneficial component of having a network, because a lot of fish spawn and their larvae go up into the water column. So the spawners in one geographic area are actually influencing and feeding an MPA in a different geographic area. So policymakers just can't draw a circle on the map and walk away. There's a need for engagement and feedback with the community and the researchers.
Next, I want to dig into why fish spawning aggregation sites matter. So question for you, Stephanie, and then for you, Anna. Stephanie, what is it about the Nassau groupers' life history that makes protecting their spawning aggregation sites so critical? This is where the target species y'all are focusing on in the Big Fish Initiative. I'd love to dig in a little bit about that specific fish and why it matters. And I'd love to hear more about why it's so important to include fishers alongside researchers and decision makers in this effort.
So Nassau grouper they only are known to spawn in these spawning aggregation sites. There's never been observed spawning. So all that we know is that all the spawners migrate to a specific area at a predictable time and space. It's full moon, about 26 degrees Celsius water, the water temperature, and at predictable places. So the fishermen know where these aggregation sites are, and that's how we as researchers know where these sites are. So they migrate up to hundreds of kilometers from their home reef in groups. So all the fish are doing the same, they're in synchrony with each other, and they migrate to these specific areas. We don't know what makes these areas special. They're usually deeper water, they're close to the shoreline, so they are accessible to fishers. And they go to these geographic areas and they wait for the full moon, and they rush up into the water column to spawn at relative to sunset. These fish have to be 4 to 5 years old in order for them to be sexually mature. And so there's a lot of questions on how do they know where to go, when to go. We do know that they move from their home reefs to the spawning aggregation sites in groups. So are the older individuals kind of showing the younger individuals the pathway to these spawning aggregation sites? We're not really sure about how all that works. And our limited observations indicate that the groups moving from the reefs to the spawning aggregation sites can be anywhere between 25 and a couple hundred individuals. And so not only is there this explosion at the spawning aggregation site and this congregation of fish, but they're along the way from their home reefs. They are moving together in groups. And, it's a perilous journey for these fish. They're fished on their reefs, on their home reefs. They're moving along these shelf edge to these aggregation sites, and then they're getting to these aggregation sites where there used to be up to hundreds of thousands of fish, and unfortunately, because of fishing pressure, there are much fewer fish at these aggregation sites, and there's fewer aggregation sites as well from what we know. So along the way, these fish are subject to being caught, and not only are these fish important as protein for fishers, but they're also apex predators on the reef. So they're also important to the health of the whole reef ecosystem. And I believe we're going to see a wonderful film a piece of the film at the end that actually shows these fish working up in the water column and spawning.
Aesthetically is such an amazing spectacle. And when you are underwater, we were talking about that, Judy, the other day, the vibration, it's I've never witnessed anything like that. But going back to our point, Stephanie just said that fishers always know where these spawning aggregations are. Fishers always know first, way before scientists. And to your question about why it's important to get them involved in the process, it's not only what we already talk about, to compensate the lack of enforcement and to be fair to and create alternative livelihoods, but also because the traditional knowledge that they bring to the table is so complementary to the scientific knowledge. It's thanks to the big fish spawning aggregations and all my colleagues working in the region, I witnessed this collaboration. It's precious. Judy, I'm sure you have experience there. They are the ones taking you there. They know when this happens. And as you know, the clues are very specific, right? The moon, the salinity, it's a magical spectacle, but the temperature, all these things have to come together. How do fishers know when these happen and where exactly? It's kind of a mystery to me, but the thing is that traditional knowledge dovetail with the scientific knowledge is invaluable, right? And I've witnessed what happens in places like, for example, in Belize or Mexico, right? When these two unlikely allies come together, they reach to the lawmakers, and decision makers actually go for it and get involved. And it's when magic happens and regulations happen. And sometimes it's all about votes, and politicians have their agendas. If they have the people and the scientists on their side, there's regulations and there are protection. And it's very important we didn't mention that, but we talk about managers, and the enforcement is very, very important. And lawmakers and managers need to make sure that the enforcers have everything that they need. Sometimes they have the willing to do the surveillance and do their job, but they don't have what they need, from boat to gas to. So it's important the three of them working together is key.
Excellent. And Judy, in your illustrious career in conservation, you have researched both fish and people. What can you tell us about what you've learned about how environmental education can really connect individuals within these communities with something they may never be able to witness, like an incredible fish spawning aggregation site or aggregation? How do you get people to care about this and understand their importance?
I think, thanks, Alex, and that's really the essence of a lot of our environmental communication. So Anna's spoken a lot about the communities who know what's going on, so the fishermen who know what's going on. But there are thousands and millions of people who look out over the ocean and they see a big blue blanket. And this big blue blanket covers the incredible diversity in the ocean. And I think that it's our role to roll back that blue blanket and show people the amazing animals and plants that live in the ocean. And it's by doing that that we can inspire care and spark that interest. And we can do that through aquariums, through some incredible video footage that we saw earlier. We're going to see more of underwater photography, some of the deep cameras now are revealing amazing animals that live at depths that we never thought there was even life possible. So by rolling back that blue blanket, we can show people what's out there and then just light a little spark of interest. And then after that, we can go on to talk about the importance of the ocean for human health and why we need to care for the ocean and how we can care for the ocean. But something that I think we often forget is that concept of emotion when we're communicating about the ocean. Because I truly believed in the early part of my career that if people knew enough, then obviously people would be making the right decisions. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I've learned that actually knowledge is not enough. Knowledge is just one part of the equation. If we can touch people's hearts with our stories about amazing fish, if we can tell the stories about the fish as animals, not as stocks, if we can inspire people to care, then we can get onto the knowledge stuff. So to me, it's really inspire care, get some emotion going, then start talking about action, but then also empower people. So use the knowledge, but empower people. It's pointless having lots of good ideas if we don't give people the opportunity to take action.
That was a fantastic closing. So in a sentence or two, Judy and Anna, I'd love to learn how this community can help support your work. And Anna, if you can close this out by telling us a little bit about the clip we're about to see right after this session ends. Judy, you want to go first?
Go, Judy, please.
Very quickly, if anyone would like to celebrate Marine Protected Areas Day, it's on the 1st of August. Please contact me. Love to share ideas with you. We just want to give everything away and make it as big an international event as we can. And happy to help anybody who wants to work on communities and MPAs. We're all learning. We've all got lots to learn. Love to share, love to learn. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I will be there. Also, there's a great opportunity to learn more about fish spawning aggregations, which is the IUCN Global Workshop of Fish Spawning Aggregations with a special focus on fishers' knowledge, and that will be happening on June 10th and 11th. And if you go to the Big Fish Initiative, we are on social media, we have a hub, bigfishinitiative.com. We will be promoting this event so you can register and learn. And the other thing is, if you're a fisher, please join us, the Big Fish Initiative. And if you are the general public, don't eat fish when they are spawning. When you get to places on your vacation, ask at the restaurant, especially groupers and snappers, are they spawning? If they are not, you can go ahead, but if they are, lionfish is always a delicious option, right? So.
Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone who came, and I hope you all check out these great initiatives and opportunities to get involved. Following this panel, you are going to be treated to a beautiful scene from Anna's film Treasure of the Caribbean. This film is available for free community screenings, and we'll put that link to request a screening in your community in our resources. Anna, anything else to add about this clip?
Hope. That's the key, and that's what inspired our film. It's all about beauty, emotions, and hope, because there are a lot of bad news out there, but we can do this if we work together. We really can. We are doing it. So, hope.
Nailed it. Thank you all.
Nassau groupers are solitary most of the year. Reproduction brings them together. Some will travel hundreds of miles. They arrive in December and January, when Caribbean waters are coolest.
They start communicating to each other. They have different signals, different languages, or different words or vowels for the different behaviors that they conduct only when they aggregate to spawn.
They also communicate with stylized movements and shifting patterns on their skin.
They look cool already. They got their stripes and everything. But when it's getting close to spawning, they're like trying on different outfits. Some turn white, some turn black.
More groupers arrive. The chorus swells in volume. Some wait on the sea floor, conserving their energy.
They need to synchronize to 1 or 2 nights. Everybody has to have their eggs and their sperm ready for that moment. They are communicating, are we ready to spawn? Do you think we can spawn now?
As their numbers grow, they rise from the seafloor each evening, as if rehearsing. As the full moon approaches, the performances become more sophisticated.
Where the real fun is in the courtship prior to spawning. Each has their own suite of behaviors and sounds that all come together into this courtship dance.
If they are ready, they change into matching costumes.
As you get closer to spawning, they all choose this tuxedo, it looks like to me. Black, black, black with a bar over the eye and a white belly. We call it bicolor phase. It's like a vaudeville act. Males fighting over females, making sounds at each other.
Males wrestle around the females. The noise builds. But night after night, they hold back. Then one night, the temperature is right. The moonlight is right. Most importantly, there's a critical mass of fish. The chorus reaches a crescendo. Then, silence. Spawning has begun.
These are the volcanoes of reproduction for the entire region. All of these fish coming all together at these promontories, currents that are upwelling and shooting by there and creating and captured in gyres, some shooting way long distances to seed other places. That is the large-scale connectivity throughout this entire wider Caribbean basin.
Thank you so much for that engaging conversation and wonderful underwater footage on a wide-ranging topic and such wide-ranging marine species. What we're now going to do is actually shift the conference a little bit Congress a little bit, because prior I introduced about plants and Brazil. So we're going to be going to that very, very soon. But we do have, before we go into that, we do have some resources for this big fish conversation over on the sessions page, like some additional videos. So please be sure to go and check them out. And you can actually request a screening of Treasure of the Caribbean, the film clip that came from the end of that documentary there. So by all means, please go and do that. But now we're going to return to Brazil and the Rio Botanic Garden and learn all about Brazilian fungi.
Olá a todos, eu sou Eduardo Fernandes, do Centro Nacional de Conservação da Flora, no Jardim Botânico do Rio de Janeiro. Hoje nós vamos abordar os nossos esforços aqui no Brasil para combater o risco de extinção associado às espécies de plantas brasileiras. A crise de biodiversidade, como todos aqui sabem, é uma realidade. A sexta de extinção em massa tem sido, sim, exacerbada pelas mudanças climáticas e essa sinergia tem produzido efeitos nefastos sobre a perpetuação da biodiversidade. Nesse cenário, a gente sabe hoje que 45% da biodiversidade de plantas do mundo corre risco de desaparecer, que pelo menos 600 espécies de plantas já foram extintas, o que evidencia que muitas espécies podem ter sido perdidas mesmo antes de serem descritas. O Brasil é um país mega diverso e possui a flora mais diversa do planeta. Quase metade das espécies são endêmicas do país. Isso evidencia bastante a responsabilidade brasileira no cenário global de conservação de espécies. Apesar das políticas ambientais extremamente avançadas, mais de 9.500 espécies de plantas estão em risco enfrentando diversas ameaças. Hoje, mais de 3.700 espécies correm risco de desaparecer no Brasil. Essas espécies estão sofrendo declínios em seus hábitats e extensão de ocorrência em área de ocupação, e frequentemente também reduções populacionais severas, promovidas principalmente pela expansão das atividades agro-silvopastoris, pela expansão urbana, pela retirada seletiva de madeiras, pelas atividades minerárias e pelo aumento na frequência e da intensidade dos eventos de incêndio. Quais são, então, as estratégias que o Brasil tem adotado para reverter o risco de extinção associado à flora brasileira? Um dos caminhos foi a criação, ainda em 2009, do Centro Nacional de Conservação da Flora, aqui no Instituto de Pesquisa do Jardim Botânico do Rio de Janeiro. O centro, que tem como missão assegurar todas as condições para prevenir perda de espécies, alinha-se diretamente tanto à Política Nacional da Biodiversidade, como também à Estratégia Global para a Conservação de Plantas, a GSPC, no âmbito da Convenção da Diversidade Biológica. O CNC Flora também adotou de forma estratégica em suas abordagens o ciclo de conservação de espécies, tão relatado nesse congresso. Avaliamos mais de 9.500 espécies e publicamos livros vermelhos para direcionar os esforços de conservação e subsidiar também a publicação da lista oficial de espécies ameaçadas da flora brasileira, que é reconhecida pelo Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudanças do Clima. Implementamos planos de ação nacionais para espécies ameaçadas, cobrindo cerca de 30% da flora reconhecida como ameaçada no Brasil. Também temos a comunicação eficaz e a colaboração como peças fundamentais para avançarmos na proteção das espécies e na reversão do risco de extinção. E isso o CNC Flora tem feito com consistência. Por fim, ainda há um grande caminho a percorrer, principalmente aprofundando os esforços na detecção de risco de extinção de mais de 12.000 espécies endêmicas do Brasil que ainda não foram avaliadas, na expansão das políticas públicas e na inclusão do reino fungo nos mecanismos de proteção aqui apresentados. Agradeço a todos pelo apoio contínuo e pela atenção depositada aqui nessa fala. Obrigado.
Olá, gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade de falar um pouco sobre os esforços e as conquistas nesse caminho da conservação de fungos no Brasil. Como todos sabemos, os fungos, de uma forma muito discreta, são imprescindíveis para a qualidade dos ambientes naturais, mas também para a nossa sociedade de modo geral. E é impossível pensarmos em conservação da biodiversidade, animais e de plantas ou de ecossistemas sem a conservação dos próprios fungos. O Brasil, nesse contexto, se torna uma região estratégica, porque pode hospedar aí até 600.000 espécies de fungos. Os fungos sofrem com as mesmas ameaças que os animais e as plantas sofrem. E a gente vem vendo no Brasil uma degradação ambiental que acaba se intensificando com as mudanças do clima. Das 781 espécies avaliadas e publicadas na lista vermelha global, 10% ocorre em ecossistemas brasileiros. Essas 78 espécies, metade delas estão ameaçadas em algum nível. Como os fungos não estão previstos na legislação ambiental brasileira, não existe ainda uma lista vermelha nacional e, por consequência, não existem também ações concretas de conservação para essas espécies. Por conta disso, no ano passado, em 2023, nós criamos o grupo de especialistas em fungos da IUCN no Brasil para fazer essa comunicação com agentes do governo, mas também com a sociedade de modo geral. A primeira grande conquista foi, em conjunto com o CS Brasil e o CNC Flora, conseguir colocar os fungos nesse documento oficial do Ministério do Meio Ambiente que orienta os estados a como proceder com a construção das suas listas vermelhas. E outra coisa que nós temos são projetos de pesquisas como espécies ameaçadas, onde a gente procura conhecer um pouco mais sobre a biologia dessas espécies e quais os requerimentos necessários para a sua sobrevivência. E isso acabou desenvolvendo na primeira ação concreta de conservação de fungos ameaçados no Brasil, que é uma conservação ex situ, onde nós estamos preservando diversidade genética em uma coleção de culturas. Ou seja, o Brasil começa a se tornar um país onde valoriza e conserva os seus fungos. Me coloco à disposição para as perguntas.
Thank you so much to Eduardo and Leandro for those fantastic talks. Now coming up, discovering Peru's yellow-tailed monkey, a visit to National Species Weekend at Dublin Zoo, creating Ireland's National Biodiversity Plan. And first, I would like to introduce Dr. Kira Milam, Director of Strategy and Partnerships for the IUCN's Species Survival Commission, to moderate our next panel on accelerating strategy and impact globally.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next session of the World Species Congress. This session is focusing on accelerating impact and strategy globally. And we're joined by some incredible panelists to spend the next 25 minutes talking to us about this incredibly important aspect of species conservation, because ambitious targets are only as good as the strategy and impact that they can drive. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to our three panelists. First of all, we have Lisa Faraway. Lisa is Program Manager for the Global Wildlife Program, a global environment facility, GEF, financed and a World Bank-led program that brings together 38 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean to combat illegal wildlife trade, promote wildlife-based economies, and enable human-wildlife coexistence. Lisa is also the World Bank's focal point for the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, the ICCWC, and Lisa also has experience working with UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, in Asia and the Pacific, as well as CITES Secretariat and the Government of Australia. Welcome, Lisa. We're also joined by Alice Hughes. Alice currently works as a professor at the University of Hong Kong and was previously a professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Having previously worked in Thailand, Australia, and the UK, where she graduated from her PhD at the University of Bristol. Alice's work focused on the interface between conservation ecology and conservation action, based on collating and analysing the data needed to enhance our understanding of biodiversity patterns and threats, identify and fill data gaps, and develop frameworks to develop priorities and solutions. Welcome, Alice. and Alexei Logigon is our final of our third panelist, and Alexei joins us working as a technical analyst for the United Nations Development Programme. He provides technical support to parties through CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, through the Global Biodiversity Framework Early Action Support Project. Alexei's main responsibilities include supporting capacity building programs and has previously worked at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for the Asia and Pacific in Environment and Statistics. So I'm sure you'll all agree with me that we have an incredibly exciting panel. So I'd love to hear from you all. Whether or not you're feeling optimistic. We've just spent the last 13 hours at the World Species Congress hearing about stories about biodiversity and species conservation from around the world. But how optimistic are you feeling that as a global community, we can accelerate our collective impact for biodiversity conservation so that we genuinely can halt extinctions and drive biodiversity recovery? Lisa, How optimistic are you feeling? And if so, if you think that we can do this, what do you think it will take?
Thanks, Kira, and delighted to be here. The weather in Washington, D.C. is not particularly optimistic. It's a bit wet and dreary, but I think we really have to be optimistic that we can achieve GBF targets if we work together across sectors and bringing together a wide range of stakeholders. And I think to do this, we have to recognize how critical biodiversity is to a livable planet. See that this is not a niche issue. It's not just a conservation issue. It's a development issue. And I really think if we make the value of nature, the value of species, part of the development conversation, this will help us scale up impact. And I think we are seeing this. So for the first time, we see human-wildlife conflict included in a global target for biodiversity. And this recognizes that this is a conservation issue and it's a development issue. And we see that this is an increasing challenge in so many countries. The Global Wildlife Program did a survey, and we found that 73% of governments said that human-wildlife conflict is increasing. And I think this is just one example that shows it's conservation and development. We see increasing recognition of biodiversity as wealth and a producer of jobs. If you just look at nature-based tourism, everyone listening would realize this is an industry that relies on species conservation, often sightings of threatened species. We've got a range of data at the World Bank from multiple protected areas that shows for every $1 tourist dollar that's spent in a protected area, that puts $2 into the hands of local incomes and communities. One protected area in Zambia alone, South Luangwa National Park, generates 28,000 jobs. 30% of the working age population is employed in tourism. So I think to accelerate impact, we need more data to understand this. Hard data that can provide the business case to decision makers and really show that species conservation matters and is critical for development.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lisa. So really focusing on that, the positive solutions, that the interface between humans and biodiversity. That's great. That's a fantastic intro into our discussion. Alice, how about you? What are your thoughts on this? How optimistic are you feeling?
I think like anyone who works in conservation, we have days when we feel despair and we have days when we feel optimistic. But I think we all need to reflect on how far we've come. I remember when I was a child and people said, well, what will you do when you grow up? And I said, I'll be a conservationist. And back then, no one knew what a conservationist was. No one realized how important it was to conserve biodiversity, and not many people were part of the solution. Now let's think about the data. Let's think about the fact that almost everyone has heard of eBird and iNaturalist, and many people are uploading their data onto it. That means rather than it being a minority act that not many people are paying attention to, it is something that everyone is engaging with. And that is not only really important for collating good data, but it's the first step to actually engaging people to be part of the solution. Because conservation really does take everyone. It can't just be a minority of us sitting, plugging away at the computer or going down to the bottom of a bat cave to find some obscure bat. It takes everyone, and we need to engage with and enthuse everyone to show how important it is. On a different scale, if we think about just the scale of achieving the global biodiversity framework, that was a monumental feat, especially coming out of COVID when everyone was thinking about the economy. Getting an agreement on that scale, despite the fact that, of course, there are issues, of course, it's not perfect. But we got an agreement. We have ambitious targets that will take us forward. And for the first time, we also have a monitoring framework. Now, for those who aren't aware, the monitoring framework is basically the set of different metrics that we can use to track if we're moving towards or away from our targets. But without having that kind of data, we don't have the ability to see if we are moving in the right direction. And if not, what can we do about it? And so whilst there are, like for so many of us, days when I do feel despair as we lose another bit of rainforest, I also see action. I also see governments buying in and realizing how important it is. And some of the very best targets were because of scientists working with parties to make sure we have the data we need to move forward. And so that partnership, that enthusiasm, and the fact that we do have more people actually getting behind this and realizing how important people is something that makes me optimistic.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alice. So far we've got participatory, inclusive, data-driven approaches and really scaling up to meet that ambition and making sure that we're linking livelihoods and lifestyles to biodiversity solutions. I think this is fantastic. Alexis, what are your thoughts? What do you think it will take for us to make these targets a reality?
Thanks so much, Kira, and also delighted to be here. I very much agree with Lisa and Alice on the points that were made, and specifically on the data collection. For my part, I haven't been working in the field of conservation for too long, maybe a year and a half. But in this 1 year, I've seen pretty positive dynamics happening on the ground in the countries. I'm not saying that everything is perfect, that we're on track with everything. We do have some data that is showing that we are a little bit behind on some of the targets. But I think there are reasons to be optimistic about our ability to make tangible progress in this decade in our efforts to conserve biodiversity and species globally. I wanted to be maybe a little bit more concrete. There are many initiatives and global projects out there, and one of them, and I can only speak from the perspective of the project that I work on, which Kira, you introduced. It's called the Global Biodiversity Framework Early Action Support Project, where governments are leading efforts to fast-track readiness and early action to implement the framework. And what we're seeing through this work is that governments are putting more effort into elevating the political will and the recognition of NBSAPs and biodiversity conservation at the highest level of the government. We have many success stories, many examples from countries that are doing just that. I don't want to speak too much on behalf of the countries, but for instance, we have countries who have instituted national policies that really set a vision for NBSAP revision in their national policies. The other countries are amplifying the role of nature on their national and subnational agendas. So we really see a lot of success stories there. There are different levels of success among the countries, but I think what it will take, and one thing that is quite critical here, is for those countries that are a little bit advanced in this work to take on a bit of a leadership role and support those dialogues and cooperation going forward.
Thanks, Alexi. I think you just brought up such an important point of learning from one another and having countries that are advanced taking a leadership role in this. And I think part of the World Species Congress objectives is to try and foster those connections and collaborations if they're not already in place. I'm going to ask all of the panelists again, sort of two questions in one. If we're going to achieve these targets, I think we've already heard all of you say that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take civil society and citizen science. It's going to take governments. It's going to take conservationists and corporations as well, and looking for solutions that bring together everyone. So I'd love to hear from all of you what mechanisms and tools, but also what connections you think are needed to span both on the ground, so local to national to global actions. So these frameworks and tools that go from local to global, but also this kind of collaboration between countries and so looking at exchange across regions, this exchange between countries. So what will it take to have these collaborations and mechanisms and tools that are necessary to learn from one another and drive collective impact? I'm going to throw straight back to you, Alexi, actually, and then go back in reverse order. So Alexi, what do you think are the tools and mechanisms we need for those connections?
Oh, thanks, Kira. Also a very important question here. So as part of the GBF and the Early Action Support Project that I just mentioned, our team is providing a range of technical support to the countries that we work with. So we've developed a range of guidance, tools, webinar series to support countries in this work for NBSAPs. But here I wanted to talk about one specific tool that we have that we have developed, which is the NBSAP Forum. And the NBSAP Forum is intended to support countries in this work and also make those global level connections that we're talking about here. So maybe some of you listening are maybe familiar with the NBSAP Forum because it's not a new platform. It's been around for almost 10 years, I believe. But recently, UNDP and in partnership with Secretariat of the CBD and UNEP, we launched a version 2.0 of this forum that reflects the new framework, which is now not so new, and also the 23 global targets. So basically, in just a few words, the forum is a virtual community of practice that is supporting countries in their implementation of the GBF. So specifically, it aims countries and people who are involved in this work in finding the information that they need to develop and implement effective NBSAPs, and also later on the national reports. So it's a place to ask questions, to interact and seek expertise from international experts and share overall just good practices, solutions, challenges, anything really relevant to the work related to NBSAP. So it brings together practitioners and people involved in this work. There's several useful functions here. You have an online platform for exchange, resource library, e-learning opportunities for people to build capacities, and all of that available in a few multiple languages. So that's one tool among many others. I'm also curious to hear about colleagues here to see what they have to propose.
Thanks, Alexi. And I'm hearing you that the NBSAP Forum is such a fantastic resource for people wanting to really accelerate their country's work in this space. And I also would encourage anyone that isn't familiar with the countries in which you're working, their national biodiversity and action strategies. If you can find out those NBSAPs and ensure that your species conservation work is connected and collaborative with those national plans, then I think it goes a long way towards us all working together under a united strategy. So definitely check out the NBSAP Forum, seek out your country's NBSAP, and make sure that the work that you're doing is collaborative and connecting under that. Alice, what are your thoughts on the tools and mechanisms that we need in place for these kinds of connections?
So I'm going to take two broad approaches here. The first is thinking about commodities and global supply chains, something we've seen happening in Europe in the last few years, which also brings me hope, is the fact that we can genuinely institute zero deforestation supply chains now for the first time. If we do not connect up users and consumers with the impacts they have in biodiversity hotspots, we cannot conserve biodiversity. And so those policy changes, which are motivated by the science, the fact that we have things like Starling verification trays and a host of other tools to track those impacts, means that we can finally start actually moderating and mitigating them. But that goes past the commodities that people are familiar with, like timber, and extends to things like the global pet trade. Now, many people listening to this call are probably not aware that the global wildlife market is worth about 380 billion a year. It is a huge industry, and most of that is legal. And whilst many people might be familiar with the fact that we are often unsustainably consuming fishes, and sustainable fish stocks is one of the monitoring parts of the monitoring framework, they may be less aware of the fact that we are also consuming literally thousands of species as pets. In fact, IPBES estimated that there's around 50,000 species in trade, which is a lot of species, especially when we consider that many of these come from the wild. Some of the tools we've used have included things like web scrapes to try to have a better number of what's in trade, and we've presented that information in arenas like CITES to help with the uplisting of species which may be vulnerable to unsustainable trade. This is something that still requires a huge amount more work, because we don't routinely monitor what is in trade if it is not listed within CITES, and a lot of those species are coming from the wild with very little population data. So this is an area which requires a lot more work and a lot more engagement, but it's something that people are starting to become cognizant of. At the other end of the spectrum, and going back to what Alexis was saying about NBSAPs, I'm also part of something called APBON, the Asia Pacific Biodiversity Observation Network, and that is one of the regional networks that nests under GEOBON, the Global Biodiversity Observation Network. Within the Asia Pacific region, our working group is working with delegates from each country to look at their NBSAPs, but also to collate what data exists, whether it is or is not accessible, because a lot of it is private within government repositories, and what the major gaps are, so that we can ensure countries have the data they need to ensure they are moving towards their MBSAPs and to develop effective and meaningful targets that can be implemented within the country. Because of course, if we don't implement within the country, if we don't measure within the country, we can't achieve anything. And to do these kinds of things, sharing best practice, sharing skills, and of course, aggregating data from a broad region like Asia is essential, because otherwise we simply can't track what's happening to biodiversity on the ground and ensure that we allocate resources where they're needed to ensure it's adequately protected.
Definitely. Thank you, Alice. Especially those global commodities chains, the interconnectedness becomes so crucial, and having good data and good learnings and best practice globally is critical. Lisa, over to you. What do you think are the best approaches and the tools and mechanisms in place for this global sharing at the national, between nation to nation and region to region, but also at the local to global level?
Thanks, Kira. And here I think it really comes down to the power of knowledge and recognizing that the knowledge that everyone has, whether they're a local executing partner, a local community, a national government, a global technical partner, this knowledge is valuable to someone else that's dealing with the same challenge or trying to implement the same approaches. And this is really what the Global Wildlife Program is all about. So it's about the 38 countries coming together with their local implementing partners, a range of technical partners, working out how can we share knowledge and experiences so that everyone can learn together. And this program, I think, is interesting because it's species-based. It's all about focusing on wildlife conservation. So credit to the GEF and those 38 participating countries for prioritizing this issue. But I just want to share a couple of examples building off what Alexi and Alice said on why this knowledge exchange and cross-regional exchange is so critical. So first, Alexi mentioned pet trade. If you could wildlife trafficking chains, these span regions, so they need cross-regional and global responses. And this is one of the reasons why the Global Wildlife Program was created by the GEF, to allow that collaboration. And as you see in the latest edition of the World Wildlife Crime Report, launched by UNODC this week, you can see this cross-regional coordination, both at demand and supply ends, is having impact. And particularly if you look at elephant ivory and rhinoceros horn, poaching, seizures, and market prices have declined for both of these, and wildlife populations are recovering. I think we can't underestimate the importance of replication of approaches across regions. We have one example in the Global Wildlife Program. We had a study tour in Zimbabwe. Indonesia was there. They saw firsthand a women-led ranger force within the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. They heard about the benefits in involving women rangers in patrolling. They were inspired. They took that knowledge back to Indonesia, and they established the first women-led ranger group in Indonesia. And finally, we see group learning that is relevant across regions, and I really think strengthened by the cross-regional input. People across regions may have different habitats, different species, but they're facing the same challenges. We had multiple countries involved in Global Wildlife Programs share their challenges in establishing national law enforcement coordination platforms. We brought everyone together. They established a guidance note on the topic, bringing together all of this knowledge across regions. So in conclusion, I think it's the power of knowledge will get us there.
I love it. And Lisa, I think you're so right. Too often we feel like our cultures, our species, our habitats, our contexts make us too different from one another to learn and to apply different solutions from other areas into our own work. Whereas this knowledge sharing, this global networks and global mechanisms applied at the local level and learning from one another is so critical if we are going to collectively achieve these targets. That's great. And we've got just a few minutes left in this panel. I could talk all day with this group. It's fantastic to learn from you all, but I'd love just a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what you think are the key aspects for us working together to accelerate impact and strategy globally. And Lisa, back to you.
Okay, perhaps 2 things I'll share on this. First, I think really continue to accelerate partnerships across economic sectors. I'm sure if we held this conference 20 years ago, there would have been fewer partners here than there are today. We have to keep building the partnerships across sectors, scale up private sector engagement and financing for species conservation and of landscapes. And we've talked a bit about knowledge, sharing successes, experiences. I think we have to recognize that failures are also important, and sharing why something didn't work in one location is really going to help someone else achieve success.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. Alexi.
Yeah, thanks. I very much also agree with Lisa. I would also emphasize maybe ensuring a more systematic use of inclusive, cross-sectoral and the whole of society approach to elevate the importance of biodiversity and species within national policies. I'm also very grateful for such panel discussions like this, which really allow us to raise awareness on very important topics. So I'm very hopeful that we can see more of these events in the future, especially as this year is an important one with COP coming up later this year. So having those discussions are very timely.
Thanks, Alexi. It's such a privilege to have you as part of these discussions. And I will say as well that Reverse the Red is very excited to be working with the MBSAP Forum as a technical partner as well. So we look forward to working with you more and more to provide that kind of advice and technical connections, particularly on the species targets of MBSAPs. So yeah, thank you very much. And Alice.
So I think firstly, society has to stop seeing biodiversity as the optional extra. So long it has been seen as something secondary, and we still see a lot more activity and engagement in the climate space. If you go to a biodiversity COP, yeah, we had 18,000 people. You have, I think, over 50,000 at the climate COPs. Biodiversity is our life support machine, and we need to start really recognizing how important it is. And whilst I am heartened to see increased engagement of the business and finance communities at the last COP and actually asking for more ambitious targets so they can take them back to their stakeholders, we really need to drive those messages home. It can't be something that we add on and we think about at the end. We genuinely need biodiversity mainstreaming, and governments need to start seeing it as a priority. The reality is that biodiversity, as I noted, is our life support machine. It's where our oxygen comes from, our water comes from, our food comes from. And if we mismanage ecosystems, not only do we fail to get resources we rely upon, but we also have an increased risk of zoonotic spillover and increased epidemics going into the future. We need to start valuing that. We need to start showing businesses that sustainable is business sustainable, economically sustainable, as well as more sustainable for biodiversity. And if we can truly drive those messages home, we can start managing ecosystems in a way that is not just better for us as humans, but better for the planet, because those are one in the same. And we need to finally realize that we need to start working in partnership, recognizing the value of biodiversity, and ensure that it is enshrined through all policies and all industries at all levels. And then we can start really making progress.
Fantastic. That was such a strong summary of the session. Thanks, Alice. I think what I've taken away from this 25-minute session was really looking at, I loved your point that biodiversity is not an optional extra. It's intimately and intricately connected to our livelihoods and our lifestyles and our economic chains, and that we need to be treating it as such. And I think the one thing that I've really heard resonate through this whole session is courageous collaboration, learning from one another, sharing knowledge, sharing expertise, sharing data, and working together in forums and tools that bring us closer together and allow us to learn from one another. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your expertise and your insights today. And we look forward to the rest of the World Species Congress, and we'll talk to you in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, I am Fanny Cornejo from Peru, and now we're going to talk about the yellow-tailed woolly monkey. This is a monkey that was discovered by Alexander von Humboldt at the beginning of the 1800s. Afterwards, some specimens were found by different museums, but a live specimen was never seen alive. For many years, people thought it was extinct. And 50 years ago, in May of 1974, Rasmittermeyer, Hernando de Macedo, and Anthony Luscombe went on an expedition to the northeastern forests of Peru and found for the very first time an alive individual. And the scientific community finally knew that this monkey was still alive. 50 years have passed, and unfortunately, this species is still critically endangered. We have lost more than 80% of its habitat, and unfortunately, the population is still declining. However, there is hope. At my organization, Yunkawasi, for the last 20 years, we have been working with local communities and the government to be able to find solutions to these problems. As we know, conservation is for the people, and it should be bringing benefits to local communities. Therefore, we're working on transforming local economies to be able to have people that are thriving and that can see their quality of life improve, but also that are protecting the forest and becoming stewards of their own conservation initiatives. In this way, for example, since a few years ago, we have this coffee, Café Cuda, that is being produced by local communities that are able to provide a coffee that is good quality, but is also coming from agroforestry practices that are also committed to the conservation of these species. And the same story we can find with handicrafts like the one that I'm showing, or even with products like this chocolate. These products are important for these communities because they are changing their economies. However, one thing that we need to take into consideration is that we need to change also as a society and be able to provide with different options to these communities by, for example, using the power that we have as consumers to be able to purchase and consume these products so we can have these economies thriving. Other activities that are key to be able to achieve the real conservation of a species is to work at the government level and to work with policies. We are very happy because this year, just a few weeks ago, 23 Congress people in Peru submitted a proposal for a law for the conservation of the yellow-tailed woolly monkey. In this way, Peru as a country will be committing with different actions and strategies to be able to achieve the long-term conservation of this species through the development of a national action plan that will be implemented in the 7 states where this species is found. We will be able to ensure the longevity and the sustainable conservation actions for this species. However, this is also not enough. We need all the public and all the different audiences to be able to care about these monkeys. That is why, since last year, we launched this campaign. It says, stand up for the yellow-tailed woolly monkey, achórate por el mono choro de cola amarilla, that is trying to reach different audiences, the general public, through different venues in a campaign that in Spanish means stand up, take action, react. We have a species that is only found in Peru, that is on the verge of extinction, and if we, Peru, a mega diverse country, if we cannot come as a society to be able to prevent this species from extinction, what is the fate of the rest of the species that we have here in the country? Since we launched this campaign, we have involved over 20,000 people through different avenues. For example, traditional media, digital campaigns, festivals, to be able to come up, share everything that is happening, share that people as consumers have so much power by getting involved in different actions like purchasing the products and consuming the products that are coming from local communities. And since we started that, this movement has started. We have reached Congress already. We are about to get this law approved. We have many protected areas. 3 states in Peru have committed for the creation of protected areas to further protect this species. And we have now local communities that are committed to monitoring the population of this species. Now we have hope, and we are sure that we can prevent this species from extinction. And that is why Yunkawasi has taken on the pledge that by 2030, we will reverse the red, and we will be able to take this species from critically endangered and get it at a lower category, because there is still hope if we start working all together as a group, and if we stand up for the yellow-tailed woolly monkey.